welcome to the inaugural Norton Educational Series program of the International Foundation for Gastrointestinal Disorders. Thank you so much for your patience this morning. We apologize for the technical difficulties that we've had here with getting this video started, but here we are. We are a few minutes running late, so I'm going to try to go ahead and get us underway. For those of you who are not familiar with the International Foundation for Gastrointestinal Disorders, let me give you my elevator speech. Basically, IFFGD was started 30 years ago by a patient named Nancy Norton. She has a gastrointestinal disorder and realized early on that there was no education available for her. And so her and her husband set out on a lifelong quest, not only to educate themselves, educate others in the GI illness community, educate physicians on the needs of patients, but also going to Washington to educate lawmakers on the importance of passing legislation that is critical to patients with gastrointestinal illness. She spent her lifetime working on behalf of patients, and here we are at IFFGD striving to continue that mission and continue to bring things forward. One of the things that we've done is we've started this new program. The Nancy and Bill Norton Patient Education Series strives to help educate patients by patients teaching patients, but also going to the experts. And today we have with us Dr. Shanti Esram, who many of you spoke with in the chat. Dr. Esram is an associate professor of medicine here at the University of Michigan, where we're streaming live today. She is an advisory board member for IFFGD, a great friend to the organization and to patients everywhere, and she was generous enough to be our course director. So thank you so much for joining us, Shanti, and thank you for having us here in this Food for Life kitchen.
Yeah, thanks, Cecile. It's really my pleasure and my privilege to be here with you guys today. Again, thank you for your patience, and shout out to our tech support today for troubleshooting. That was really quite amazing. So we are live streaming today from the University of Michigan Food for Life kitchen here in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And this teaching kitchen was really developed as a teaching platform to bring culinary medicine to the community. I think that all of us can understand that the role of health and nutrition and food can play a really big role in the management of chronic conditions like cardiovascular disease or diabetes or obesity. But it also plays a really big role in the treatment of diseases and symptoms related to GI conditions. Culinary medicine is essentially using the foundational components of nutritional science, cooking techniques, as well as traditional medical approach to treat patients in their chronic diseases. And using a kitchen like this can really help bring that concept to patients in a real life manner. And so today we have a really great lineup for you today, integrating some of these culinary medicine thoughts and approaches to, and also educating you guys about chronic conditions, chronic GI conditions. We're going to start off by learning some basics about gastroenterology and anatomy in general, as well as some basics of nutrition, and then moving on to chronic constipation, IBS, heartburn, and also talking about some other dietary components and why those types of foods may trigger GI symptoms in some patients.
Sounds like an absolutely wonderful program, and we're thrilled to be here at the University of Michigan with some great friends here and some wonderful educators. I hope that you will enjoy the talks that you hear today, and we're going to start first with actually Dr. Esram giving us an overview of the GI tract from top to bottom. Please remember throughout this program that if you have any issues, questions, please utilize that chat feature in Vimeo. We do know that there are some cell phones and platforms that have a difficulty with the chat feature. If you have difficulty, please just email us. Our email address is iffgd@iffgd.org. So that's pretty simple, iffgd@iffgd.org. You may also give us a shout out on social media, ask your questions there. We will make sure that they get directed back to Dr. Esram today so that we can answer those on the breaks and then also during our Q&A session. So next we're going to hear from Dr. Esram herself. It's going to really set the stage for today and really talk about sort of, how does your GI tract work?
name is Dr. Shantia Thorin, and I'm here to talk to you about Gut Matters 101. Welcome to this exciting day today at the Norton Educational Series. And we're going to have a lot of really great content to talk about with you. But first, I thought it would be great to talk about general GI physiology and anatomy so we can understand what's going on during the rest of the speakers today. So when we talk about the GI tract or digestive system or gut, what we're really talking about is a series of organs. And our digestive system is made up of a series of organs that allows our bodies to absorb nutrients and water from the food we eat. And as food travels through the digestive system, it's broken down, sorted, and reprocessed before being circulated around the body to nourish and replace cells and supply all of the other very important organ systems in our bodies. And usually this series of organs is doing its job kind of under the radar and unbeknownst to us. But occasionally, however, as many of you know, and as we'll learn about more today, this isn't always the case. So think about it this way. You are anticipating a fresh baked apple pie coming out of the oven. And just the sight and the smell of it are really enough to make your gut kick into high gear. And so we'll discuss this whole process as food moves down and through the GI tract, starting from the top. So digestion actually starts in the mouth, where chewing and saliva breaks down food, so it's more easily processed by your body. It then is transferred from the mouth and throat into the esophagus, which is a muscular tube connecting the throat to the stomach. The esophagus contracts as it moves food from the mouth into the stomach, and this process is called peristalsis. So you're swallowing this bite of pie, the muscles in your mouth and throat propel it up to the upper esophagus, and then the muscles in the wall of esophagus create these synchronized waves, where above that morsel or bite of food, the muscles are contracting, but below that bite of food, the muscles are relaxing, allowing the food to pass through without resistance to the lower part of the esophagus. And when the lower part of the esophagus kind of senses or feels that bite of food there's a valve at the lower part of the esophagus called the lower esophageal sphincter, or LES. And this then allows the food to, the esophagus then relaxes, allowing the food to pass in to the stomach through the lower part of the esophagus. Most of the time, the stomach contents and acid in the stomach stay below the lower esophageal sphincter. And while some reflux of contents and acid are normal, gastroesophageal reflux can occur when too much acid or other stomach contents flow the wrong way, sometimes causing symptoms like regurgitation or heartburn. There are other symptoms or disorders related to common conditions of the esophagus. These include esophageal strictures, which is a partial blockage in the esophagus, which can lead to some swallowing difficulty. Also, Barrett's esophagus is a condition where there's abnormal cells at the lower part of the esophagus, possibly increasing your risk for esophageal cancer. And then finally, motility disorders can occur when peristalsis is disordered, sometimes causing esophageal pain or swallowing difficulties as well. So moving on from the esophagus to the stomach, after that bite of food moves from your esophagus to the stomach, that pie or a little bite of food is broken down further. And the stomach has very strong muscular walls. And in addition to storing your meal or holding that food, the stomach's job is to churn and mix the food into smaller and smaller pieces. The digestive glands in the stomach lining produce stomach acid and enzymes, which mix with the food to form a murky semi-fluid mass or paste called chyme. And here, the muscular walls of the stomach, along with the digestive enzymes, mix up the food, further breaking it down And then waves of muscular contractions propel it through a valve called the pylorus or pyloric sphincter, which opens and closes, allowing the food to pass from your GI, from your stomach into the upper part of your small intestine or duodenum. This pylorus opens and closes and might release about 1/8 of an ounce or 4 milliliters of chyme at a time. The rest of it's held back for more mixing until it's small enough to pass through. There's really common stomach disorders that you may or may not have heard of. The first one that we'll talk about briefly is called peptic ulcer disease or ulcers. And this is generally caused by non-steroidal anti-inflammatory medications like ibuprofen or naproxen, but also a very common bacteria called H. pylori can cause stomach ulcers as well. Gastroparesis is a motility disorder of the stomach, which is caused by slow stomach emptying. Here, patients might have abdominal pain related to food, nausea, and vomiting. And then another common disorder is functional dyspepsia. And functional dyspepsia is a disorder where we can't exactly understand why patients have symptoms, but in this case, an upper scope may be normal, and blood tests and motility testing may be normal as well. So moving on from the stomach to the small intestine. The small intestine is kind of the workhorse of the GI tract. It's the longest portion of the GI tract, over 20 feet long. And here, the food continues to break down, enzymes released by the pancreas, and bile released from the liver. It's made up of 3 segments. The duodenum, which is the most upper portion and the shortest portion of the small intestine, followed by the jejunum and ileum, which are really mainly responsible for the absorption of nutrients. As bile and pancreatic digestive juices mix with other juices secreted by the wall of the small intestine and stomach, all of these nutrients are then absorbed through the villi, which serve to increase the surface area of the small intestine, allowing for greater and greater nutrient absorption. And in the intestine, including the jejunum and the ileum, food is broken down into smaller molecules so that it's absorbed. The ileum is really mainly, the ileum is the lower and most final portion of the small intestine, again, responsible for breaking down and absorbing virtually all of the nutrients that are passing through the GI tract, save for plant-based fibers that can't be broken down all the way. Common disorders of the small bowel or small intestine that you may be familiar with include celiac disease, where the small intestinal villi or those finger-like projections are damaged or flattened related to inflammation triggered by gluten protein that's found in wheat and wheat products. Similarly, Crohn's disease can damage the villi, but in Crohn's disease, there's often seen these small ulcers that you see here that can again lead to damage to the villi and also decreased absorption and abdominal pain. Certainly GI infections like viral or bacterial gastroenteritis can cause disorders of the small intestine. Small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or SIBO, is also in this category. And also irritable bowel syndrome can affect the small intestine and the colon as well, that we'll get into. In the upper section of your small intestine, or the duodenum, digestion continues as chyme from the stomach mixes with a variety of digestive juices from your pancreas, liver, and gallbladder. The pancreas is tucked just behind the stomach, and it produces digestive enzymes that help break down proteins, carbohydrates, and fat. The liver is responsible for many things, including producing bile, a solution that helps you digest fats. It also helps to filter the blood that's absorbed and filter the nutrients that's absorbed from the small intestine going to the liver, which then can pass throughout the body to nourish all of the other cells and organ systems that require the nutrients absorbed from the GI tract. The gallbladder stores the bile that the liver is making. If the bile is not necessarily needed at the time that the liver is producing it, the gallbladder can store it and save it for a time when it's needed, especially after a fatty meal. There's several disorders that are associated with some of this pancreaticobiliary system. The pancreas can be sometimes inflamed, which can lead to a pretty painful condition called pancreatitis. If the pancreas isn't able to make the enzymes that are needed by the GI tract, that can lead to some difficulty with absorption or malabsorption with pancreatic insufficiency. And then finally, pancreatic cancer can occur involving the pancreas as well. The liver is the most common disease of the liver is fatty liver disease, which can then sometimes lead to inflammation. Cirrhosis of the liver or scarring of the liver can be triggered by medications, infection, alcohol, and fatty liver disease as well. And the gallbladder may be affected by gallstones, which could cause intermittent abdominal pain, usually in that right upper quadrant of your belly. And then the gallbladder can also become infected, leading to fever and pain as well. As the residue passes from the small intestine into the colon, nearly all the water is absorbed. This 5 to 7 foot long muscular tube connects the small intestine to the rectum, and the real job of the colon is to absorb water and process this waste so that defecation can then be easy and convenient. The muscles in the wall of your colon separate this waste into small segments that are pushed through from your lower colon and into your rectum. And it's made up of 3 parts here. The ascending on the right part of your body, the transverse colon, which moves the stool, at this point it's called stool, from the right side to the left side across your abdomen, and then the descending or left colon and the sigmoid colon connecting to the rectum. Common colonic conditions, of course, include constipation, diarrhea, which may be actually normal from time to time, irritable bowel syndrome, ulcerative colitis, where there's inflammation in the walls of the colon, sometimes causing diarrhea and bloody diarrhea, and then colon polyps and cancer. Colon polyps are actually fairly common. About 20 to 30% of individuals have colon polyps on colonoscopy, and if they're not removed, they may go on to become colon cancer. We're almost done here, down to the rectum and anus, and the rectum is a 8-inch chamber that connects the colon to the anus. The rectum receives stool from the colon and sends signals to the brain that if there's stool to be evacuated, alerting the brain that this might need to happen in the near future. But if that's not possible, it can also relax and expand, holding stool until evacuation is convenient. As the rectal walls are stretched, they signal this need for a bowel movement. The anus is comprised of several muscles, the pelvic floor muscles that kind of hold everything intact, and then 2 anal sphincters, the internal sphincter and external anal sphincter, that can relax and contract as needed. And all of these muscles together work to control defecation. Their jobs are to detect rectal contents and can really sense whether they're liquid, gas, solid, and then they can control when stool should and should be excreted from your body. Common anal rectal disorders include anal fissures, which is a tear in the anal skin at the outside of the anus, hemorrhoids, engorgement of the blood vessels that are draining the anal rectal muscles, fecal incontinence, which can include both loss of control of gas as well as stool, pelvic floor dyssynergia. Pelvic floor dyssynergia is when the anal rectal muscles aren't coordinated in order to have a quote-unquote normal bowel movement. And then finally, rectal prolapse is where the lining of the colon or the rectum can come through the anal canal, causing some discomfort and feeling of incomplete bowel movements or incomplete evacuation. So as we stated earlier, the vast majority of the time, your GI tract is working under the radar to perform this vast number of functions, digestion, absorption, all to nourish not just the GI tract, but all of the cells in your body. And most of the time, we're not even really aware of the fact that this is happening. When this doesn't happen, we may become symptomatic, and there can be a lot of reasons for this. This can include disorders of the gut-brain interaction. There can also be perturbations in the GI microbiome contributing as well. Finally, nutritional causes may be playing a role in the imbalance or balance of the GI tract and all of its functions. And some of this we're going to learn about later today. So thanks for your attention. I think that we have a great program for you today, and I'll be here throughout the day to take any of your questions if needed. See you soon.
All right, so I hope you guys learned something from that Gut Matters 101. We're going to move right on to Amanda Lynette. She's one of our amazing GI dietitians. She has a lot of experience treating patients for their specific GI conditions, and she's going to give us some nutrition basics with Gut Matters 102. After this presentation, we'll be taking questions from the chat, and we'll have a little bit more time to discuss. Thanks.
Hello everyone, I'm Amanda Lynette. I'm going to talk to you about Gut Matters 101, how the gut works in relation to food, nutrition basics. Next. So the overview of what I'll be covering includes gaining a better understanding of nutrition basics, macronutrients, micronutrients, and then recognizing the relationship between different nutrients and GI symptoms. Next. All right, so what is nutrition? Nutrition is nourishment. It's how our body affects, or how food affects our body and helps the body function to stay healthy. It's the process of taking food to use it to help with our growth, metabolism, repair. It's what keeps us going every day. I think sometimes people don't actually know what nutrition means, and it's kind of incorporating all the things we put into our body to help our body function. Next. So these nourishments or nutrition are made up of 3 macronutrients that provide energy and calories to sustain life. And I will briefly go into each of the 3 main nutrients. Next. So the first is proteins. Proteins is one of the macronutrients that we need every day to be consuming. Amino acids are building blocks that make up proteins, and if you think of a string of beads, these are the little amino acids that make up the protein, and they help with growth, maintenance, and repair of body's tissues. So you think of muscle growth when you eat a lot of protein. It also helps with hair, nail, and skin growth. And then protein also helps with repairing damaged muscles and helps immune cells fight infections and inflammation. So protein also helps with the role of synthesis in maintaining enzyme and hormones such as digestive enzyme. So a good example of how this relates to the GI tract is proteins help lactase digest the sugar lactose. So like I had mentioned, our body needs to be consuming it daily. Next. So this is just a little picture to remind you of all the different protein sources. You can get it from animal foods such as beef, chicken, pork, wild game, seafood, eggs, but you can also get it from non-meat sources, lentils, seeds, legumes, different nuts, and soybeans. It's important to get a variety of sources of protein to make up your diet. Next. So the next would be fat. Fat is known for providing energy reserves, and then it also helps with structural and protection. And then fats also aid in absorption of fat-soluble vitamins, A, D, E, and K. So fats help vitamin A maintain healthy eyes, would be a good example of this. Next. So here's some examples of fats. You got some oils, your animal sources provide healthy fats, nuts, dairy products, coconut, seeds, Next. So the last of the macronutrients would be your carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are kind of like gas in a car. It provides the energy to go throughout the day. So you have carbohydrates that help maintain fuel, energy, growth, and regulate indigestion of food. So just like those proteins, we have different sugars that are building blocks to make carbohydrates, as we had amino acids as building blocks to make up proteins. So once we run out of these carbohydrates, that's when our body uses those fat sources, as I said, were energy reserves. So carbohydrates can be made up of different building blocks to categorize them into simple sugars and then complex carbs. So these simple carbohydrates include monosaccharides, disaccharides, oligosaccharides, polyols. Some examples you've probably heard of would be things like your fructose, glucose, lactose, sucrose, and sorbitol are just a few examples of these simple carbohydrates. And then the long chain carbohydrates include foods such as starches and dietary fiber. And these are more of those complex carbs. So starches include foods such as peas, corn, potatoes, lima beans, as well as like dried beans and lentils. And then fiber is a big role in our digestion and can affect GI conditions. So I will talk more about this in a minute. Next. So here are just some sources of carbohydrates. We have foods such as corn, plantains, rice, tortillas, potatoes, oats, some root vegetables, and fruit. Next. All right, so let's get a little bit more into fiber because this is really important with GI conditions. So according to the National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, dietary fiber is not broken down into glucose and goes straight through the body undigested, while functional fiber is non-digestible carbohydrates that have a beneficial physiological effect in humans. I think this chart is a nice way to kind of break it up for you into three different categories that are easy to understand. It's solubility, firmability, and viscosity. So solubility is based on the fiber's solubility in water, while viscosity refers to the gel formation in the intestinal tract that helps like thicken up the stool if you have really loose stools and increase bowel transit time. So viscous fiber sources would include berries, bananas, oats, and psyllium. Firmability is often, known as prebiotics, which is used by the gut bacteria to reduce the short chain fatty acids, and it helps aid in the diverse microbiome that everyone's trying to achieve. Soluble, fermentable, and non-viscous fibers are found to cause abdominal pain, bloating, and flatulence. And as you see here in the chart, this would be that second row. So that would be things such as chicory root, onion, artichokes, cooked and cooled potatoes, and pasta. So individuals should try to kind of aim to get a variety of these different fiber sources incorporated into their diet to help, maintain a healthy gut. But being aware of the different properties, the solubility, the firmability, the viscosity, are kind of referring back to this chart to kind of help you better understand what could cause different symptoms. A good example would be increasing your soluble fiber would help with reducing urgency or frequency of loose stools. So if you have a lot of diarrhea, you might want to increase your soluble fiber sources as you see listed on the chart. Next. All right, so now that I kind of went over the macronutrients, I will briefly touch on micronutrients. So micronutrients are part of the macronutrients in the sense that they're in food. They don't actually provide calories, but they're critical part of keeping the body operating optimally. So they kind of help aid in energy production, building protein and bones, making collagen. They help with immunity, eye and skin health. And they're categorized in two ways. You have the fat soluble and water soluble vitamins. So the fat soluble are your A, D, E, and K. And then your water soluble are all your B vitamins. So there's a variety of them. And then vitamin C. The interesting thing about vitamins is that cooking and storage can decrease their nutritional value. There was a study that found that like vitamin C was most peak optimal nutritional value was at harvest. So you want to try to kind of eat a variety of fresh, frozen, canned fruits and vegetables to get all those nutrients at their max amounts, and to try to buy them frequently and often rather than buying lettuce and leaving it in your fridge for 3 weeks. As it wilts, it will lose its vitamin C content. Next. So minerals, on the other hand, are a little more resilient. They're unlike vitamins in their chemical structure. They will hold their structure, but they're more variable based on where the food is grown, based off of the soil and the water. So food produced in California is going to be different than food produced in India because of the soil and water differences, contents of the minerals. But minerals' main role would be helping with the regulation of water within the body. So those minerals include sodium, chloride, and potassium. But some of the other jobs that minerals have include skeletal structure and obviously cardiovascular health. So you've heard about people, needing good phosphorus, potassium. Those are all important parts of our diet. Next. All right, so why is knowing the basics of nutrition important? So understanding these basic tools of the macronutrients and micronutrients and knowing where food is digested will help you choose foods that to reduce symptoms, but also promote overall health. So the goal is to maximize energy, growth, and cell repair through a combination of all the nutrients while decreasing your GI symptoms. I wanted to touch base on the micronutrients and the different vitamins and minerals because if you are told that you're deficient in any of these micronutrients, you should probably ask a healthcare professional before starting any supplementation. Micronutrients can interact with one another, or they can compete with medications for absorption or one another for absorption. Very commonly, a good example would be that vitamin C helps with the absorption of iron. So you want to take those two together. But at the same token, calcium inhibits the absorption of iron. So you don't want to take your vitamin C and your iron supplement while you're also taking your multivitamin or drinking a big glass of milk, because they're going to all compete for absorption. All right, next. All right, so with IBS, you have those short chain, rapidly fermentable carbohydrates. So that's commonly heard as the low FODMAP diet. And that's when you would want to reduce your intake of those, as I had previously discussed, for helping with IBS. Another example would be with patients with exocrine pancreatic insufficiency. You have the fat-soluble vitamins that you could be deficient in, and that's because your body is malabsorbing fat, so therefore it can't absorb those nutrients and you're losing them. Another good example when I was talking about that fiber slide would be fiber varieties and types. So a reduction in your insoluble fiber is sometimes recommended for people with intestinal strictures because those are things that can get caught up in the GI tract and worsen symptoms. All right, next. All right, that's all. Thank you.
Hi, and and welcome back. I know it's been great to get sort of a foundation for our day, hearing from Dr. Ezron first, and then, of course, just from our registered dietitian, Amanda, to talk about nutrition and how it works with your gut. I do want to say thank you. We have gotten some feedback that the sound is a little bit low for Shanti and myself. I just want you to keep that feedback coming. I'm trying to project a little bit more. We moved the microphone close to us, but if you're still having any technical issues, let us know, because that makes it for a better program for everyone. So thank you for that feedback. Before we can move to our next part of the program, which is very exciting, I want to talk about some of the questions that have come up. So we got a question during this talk, Shanti. So we have a patient who said that she's tried fiber, but it's not helping for her, and she's wondering, does that just mean she doesn't have IBS? And
Yeah, I think that, thanks. So fiber is a time-honored approach to irritable bowel syndrome, but it's not always so straightforward. Different types of fiber can have different effects on the GI tract. Some of the real problems with fiber that patients will talk to me about are bloating, and also unpalatability. Like it just doesn't taste good. They don't like taking it, sometimes for obvious reasons. And there's a lot of other approaches, dietary. So there's lots of different fibers. There's the soluble fiber, there's the insoluble fiber, but in general, the evidence shows that for IBS with constipation, fiber can be used and may be more effective than patients with IBS and diarrhea. So that's what we know that the data do tell us. In terms of if fiber doesn't work for you, does that mean you don't have IBS? Certainly not. I think that fiber, if it doesn't help, doesn't necessarily tell you about what your disease state is. I think that if fiber doesn't work for your IBS, then fiber doesn't work for your IBS, and we need to try something else.
makes sense. And it also sounds like it's pretty complicated. Fiber is a pretty broad term, so people should be speaking with their doctor or a dietitian then.
Right, absolutely. And even when you go to a regular drugstore, and then let alone online, there's just so many choices. And so getting some guidance with someone who knows you is really important.
Fantastic. I think we just had another question come in on the chat. So let's get this question.
So it is buying canned fruits okay for vitamins? Fresh can be a little expensive.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah. So the way food is canned, it's like basically canned at the peak of its freshness. And so I think that canned or frozen fruits or vegetables are a good way of keeping that nutritional content at its peak. So absolutely.
Good to know. I think that's something that all of us have wondered about in the past. So we are going to move on to our cooking demonstration. So we're really excited about this, and unfortunately you're not here to join us. In the beginning, we were going to have a nice cooking demonstration right here in the Food for Life kitchen. Unfortunately, we had to pre-record it for you, but that's okay because it enabled us to have some commentary also added. I do want you to know that downloadable on our website is our program booklet, which had you been here in person, you would have gotten this beautiful graphically designed program booklet that was collated by Carolyn Eiler, our event manager. Inside this booklet are all the recipes that you're going to see today. So don't worry about trying to scribble down notes for things. They're actually going to be in that. You can download it from our website, the event page, and we will also email you a copy following the event if we have your email address registered for the event. And if not, email us at ifgd@ifgd.org, and we'll make sure you get a copy. So next, there's 3 wonderful recipes, and they're FODMAP friendly. Can you give us the real high-level version of what does that mean when we say we're doing a FODMAP friendly recipe here?
So FODMAPs are a kind of a class of carbohydrates that may make some patients with GI states or GI conditions worse. So if it's a low FODMAP friendly recipe, that means the recipe is generally going to be safe and hopefully not trigger or make worse any GI symptoms.
Well, fantastic. So we've got a soup, a salad, and a smoothie, and we really do hope you enjoy this cooking demonstration up next.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome to a wonderful Healthy food demonstration. We're going to be, my name is Sherry, and I am with Healthy. I'm one of the culinary team, and I am with...
Hi everyone, my name is Emily Haller. I am one of the GI dietitians at Michigan Medicine. I work in the Division of Gastroenterology. We're really excited to be here with you today.
And we have 3 really awesome recipes that we'd like to show you that we think will apply really nicely with your patients and family members, or just to make, because they're all 3 very, very delicious. So what we're doing today is we're going to do a low FODMAP. It's a gingered carrot soup with a lot of really cool little ingredients to make it really flavorful, and we're going to make it with all low FODMAP ingredients. We have a quinoa tabbouleh salad, which is really bright and fresh. Also for people with on a low FODMAP diet as well can eat this, but it's also very delicious just for anybody else who wants to have a nice fresh salad. And then for the third recipe we're doing today is we're doing a smoothie. I guess, Emily, are we calling it the constipation smoothie, or what are we gonna?
It's the constipation smoothie. I keep saying we need to come up with a sexier name. But yeah, we'll get into that and why it might help with bowel movements and issues. But I mean, it's also just it's a nutrient dense smoothie that really anybody could drink and swap in and out ingredients as desired or tolerated.
Perfect. Great. So I'm going to kind of go through the ingredients. I'm going to show you what I have available, and what I've done. I'm going to give you some tips and techniques along the way, talk about some of the great little inexpensive utensils or equipment that I like to use that makes my job a lot easier. And so let's just get started on the recipes, and I hope you enjoy. So the first recipe we're going to do is the gingered carrot soup. And the key thing is I'm trying to impart as much flavor as possible. And I want the taste of garlic and the flavor of garlic, but obviously for low FODMAP, we don't want garlic in the recipe. So I'm going to make, first of all, I'm going to start off with a low garlic infused olive oil. So let me get my induction burner going. I have 1 tablespoon of olive oil. And this is going to be, I'm going to saute my garlic in this oil at a very, very low heat because I don't want to burn it. I just want the flavor to infuse into the oil. And the great thing about garlic, garlic has the great allicin cancer-fighting antioxidants in it that really work best if you break the cell walls first. So for instance, if you're going to use it for this recipe, or you're going to if you tolerate garlic and you'd like a lot of garlic, it's best to prepare it, either chop it or grate it or crush it at least 10 minutes ahead of time, because that helps that allicin breaks the cell walls in the garlic. It helps that allicin develop in the garlic and just makes so I'm crushing it a little bit. Even though I didn't wait too long, I probably should have done this about 5 or 10 minutes ago, but for our purposes today, we're going to start putting it in there. So I'm just going to put it in the olive oil. It's not going to take very long to infuse it. It's maybe 2 or 3 minutes at the most. So I'm going to let that go.
And just for everyone listening, if you're wondering like what a FODMAP is, I feel like most people are familiar with this, but this is a specific diet that we use for people who have irritable bowel syndrome or IBS. It can really help with symptoms. FODMAP's an acronym, and what it stands for is a mouthful: fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. And while this cooking demonstration is just about cooking these different meals, you know, we are going to be talking about FODMAP. So I just want everybody to be, you know, on the same page in terms of, you know, what we're talking about. FODMAPs are short chain carbs. They're in certain foods and they're in some healthy foods like garlic. So for people who are sensitive to FODMAPs or are sensitive to garlic or, you know, the fructin that's in garlic, a good way to get that garlic flavoring is to infuse oil with garlic because the flavor will infuse into that oil. But because FODMAPs are short chain carbohydrates or short chain sugars, it's not fat soluble, so it's going to stay in the garlic. So as long as you remove that garlic clove, you are again able to get a really tasty garlic infused olive oil that you can use in a lot of recipes and not have that FODMAP, the fructin there present, and yeah, makes it for a more GI friendly cooking experience.
Perfect. So that's all it really takes. So I'm going to go ahead and take that garlic clove out of there and set that aside or throw that away. And then I've got another way, since celery doesn't always sit well with everyone as well, but I kind of want that celery flavor. I'm going to use celery root for this particular recipe. And this is what a celery root looks like when you buy it in the grocery store. This particular one, you can see how fresh it is. This particular one was pretty gnarly on the bottom, and when you buy them, they're going to be really full of debris, dirt, and all that good stuff. So you will have to clean them. I've got my trusty vegetable brush that I soak it. I mean, if you soak it in a little bowl of warm, hot water and use your brush to clean it out, it kind of melts away. But this is a great vegetable that is kind of like, tastes like a potato-ish kind of part of the parsley, parsnip family, but it tastes like a very mild form of celery. So that's why we're going to use this today to flavor our soup. So if you're not familiar with how to prepare celery root, let's show you how to do that. It's a little fibrous. It's kind of like a butternut squash, so you might have to manhandle it a little bit, but you want to get all this, the brown and fibrous part off. So you're going to take your knife and kind of go around without taking off too much of the good stuff. And then turn it back over. Take this side. And try to get off as much of the brown as possible. So we've got that. And then in order to, like I said, it's a little fibrous, so you can work with it. We're going to chop this up, and really you want to be able to chop it up into fairly uniform pieces because you want it all to cook uniform, right? You don't want some that are bigger and smaller. So
How important is a sharp knife, Sherry?
oh my gosh. In fact, I just sharpened all of my knives again because I have so many times I've slipped when it's not sharp enough and cut myself. So luckily it hasn't happened too many times, but please, in order for it to go really smoothly without any issues, keep your knives as sharp as possible. And you know, even if you don't have an electric sharpener, if you have one of these, this is also great for sharpening as well. This will do the trick as well. So find one of those. So I already have, I'm gonna put my oil back on and keep it warm. And I've already cut up, for the sake of time, I've cut up some celery root that I've had previously. So that's how you cut it, or chop it up. And I'm going to add to the garlic infused olive oil, I'm going to add my celery root. And I want to keep it on pretty low temperature because I don't want to burn it. I don't really need to brown it. I just want to kind of caramelize it a little bit. And we'll get that going. And that will wipe this down. Look at that. And then let's talk about the carrots, because really the best way to purchase your carrots, this is the freshest way to do it, is the ones that already have the tops on them. So this is the preferable way to purchase them. Obviously, it's not always available right now. Carrots are pretty well priced, and then you can buy a couple of great bunches, and this is the freshest way to do it. You probably should not store with the tops on, because they will still continue to take the nutrients from the carrot to supply into the green part. So when you get home from the store, you just take the tops off, and then you store your carrots that way. And I've already cut up a bunch of carrots, but basically you just want to top and tail the carrot. And the same thing with the carrots as with the celery root. You want to make the pieces as uniform as possible.
Carrots are also a low FODMAP vegetable. Like Sherry said, pretty widely available in grocery stores. They're a particularly good source of beta-carotene, which is an antioxidant that your body converts into vitamin A. They contain fiber, just like all plant foods. All fruits and vegetables give us some fiber. You've got some vitamin K, potassium, as well as other antioxidants. And our goal today is to provide you with nutrient-dense, easy to prepare, as well as easy to digest recipes.
Okay, so I have my celery root going a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and add my 1 pound of carrots, about 3 cups, pretty generously. We'll get that going. Same thing for the carrots. We're going to have those cook about 4 to 5 minutes, soften just a little bit. We've got that. And then one of the other things that I think make this recipe pretty tummy friendly is we have a nice amount of 2 teaspoons of chopped ginger root in this recipe. And you can cut up and take the skin off of the ginger root either with a spoon, which you can go all the way around and take it off. Feels really well that way. Or if you're really handy with the knife, I kind of prefer to do it this way, and I kind of like shave it. I probably don't take off a whole lot. I don't want to waste any of it, but if you're good with the knife and you feel like you can peel it this way, great. If not, a spoon works just as well in shaving it off. So we got the ginger, and this is 2 teaspoons, so I'm going to slice off a bunch that I think is going to work for me.
I like to recommend ginger a lot for my people who I work with who experience nausea. There are some studies out there that have found that ginger may be as effective as some anti-nausea medications. So, trying to take a food as medicine approach, adding ginger to soups or try ginger tea, ginger to smoothies can be an effective way to help nausea. Ginger candies like gingins are, a favorite for some.
Now, the nice thing about this soup, since this soup is going to be pureed, you don't really need to worry about your ginger being too fine. You just want it to cook evenly. So as long as it's even pieces, you're fine, because it's going to be pureed. There won't be any hunks of ginger in it. And you can you don't like the big chunks of ginger in your food, and it kind of surprises you a little bit when you get that. So I'm going to take my ginger, put it in with my carrots and my celery root, and we're looking for a GI way to thicken and also give a feeling of creaminess to the soup. So we decided to add 2 tablespoons of rinsed rice, white rice, to the recipe, and that will cook with when the soup cooks, and also provide a little creaminess when it's blended, and also give it that little smoothness that you like in your soup without having any dairy involved. So we're going to put the rice in there, and I like to toast the rice a little bit along with the ginger. I feel like when I make rice on a regular basis, I make a pilaf or anything like that, I like to toast my rice and coat it in oil and toast it in the saute pan for a bit. The rice kernels get so much more infused with flavor that way. So we're going to get that. So anyway, we have our rice and our ginger sauteed for a few minutes. And this is where I'm going to add my vegetable broth. And I'm doing 6 cups of vegetable broth to this recipe. And then I would also add the other 4 cups to it. But with the magic of home cooking, I'm going to go ahead and take this off and bring you some soup that's already been cooked. I had this on the stove for about 20 minutes earlier. And so now the carrots, celery, root, everything is all nice and soft. So we're going to go ahead and add the rest of the ingredients. And this particular recipe, I know it sounds a little weird, but we're going to add orange juice and orange zest to this and add a little bit of coconut milk to give it a little bit of creaminess. So now that this is all cooked, and I'm going to add all the rest of the ingredients. So I'm going to start with making my zest. And I like to use a little bit of parchment to catch my zest. This is my favorite zester, the microplane grater. It works great. This recipe is 1 teaspoon of orange zest. And this actually provides freshness and brightness to the recipe. It's funny, it doesn't really taste that orangey. It's just like when you add like lemon juice or lime juice to other recipes. It just kind of brings out a brightness in it to like maybe root vegetables that sometimes can be a little bland. So there's my teaspoon.
I imagine if we were all sitting together, you know, in the Food for Life kitchen at Michigan Medicine, we would be smelling some great smells right now. That garlic infused olive oil, and then now the citrus.
I'm very fortunate. I get to be here in my M Healthy home kitchen. Another little gadget. I mean, I think everyone has their favorite gadgets, but this is probably, we do a lot of citrus at this house, and this OXO citrus just is super inexpensive. I think it's like $9 or $10, but I've had this forever, and it does a great job getting every last bit of juice from my, look at that beautiful orange. So this recipe is a 1/4 cup. It was 1 teaspoon. By the way, all these recipes are on our M Healthy website. So you will be able to reference these recipes after the demo today or after class, the conference today. So this is about, let's see, a little bit more.
I do believe the recipes will be being provided to everyone who's registered. So hopefully, if you're watching this, you'll have easy access to these recipes and can follow along, and then make them in your kitchen at home.
Right, and if you lose them, then they're on the Unhealthy website. Okay, so here's my quarter cup of orange juice, and then to give it a little extra oomph, a little extra flavor, I'm going to do add a quarter cup of coconut milk, and you can, this is my can, you can do light coconut milk, you can do full fat coconut milk. I've got an organic one right here. Make sure you shake it up really well before you measure it out. And one of the things that's really important, I think, is just in cleaning, keeping things clean and making sure everything's kind of dirt free, is I like to wet a paper towel or wet a cloth, and all my cans, I wipe the top of the can lid before I open it up, because whatever's been touched on there, when you open it with the can opener, kind of can get incorporated into your food. So I'm just kind of like, might as well take that extra step to keep any kind of debris out of your food. So we've got the coconut milk in there. I'm going to stir that up. And depending on your level of tolerance, I like a little bit of heat in my food. So I've got a little bit of ground cayenne pepper that I'm going to add, not much, just like 1/8 of a teaspoon, to give it a little zing. If it doesn't work for you, if your body doesn't like spice, that's okay too, because this is a really delicious soup. And you probably won't even miss it. So we're going to go ahead and blend that in the blender. And be prepared, it's going to be quite loud. But you really definitely want to see if you can try to cool this down as much as possible. This has been off the stove for quite a bit, so it's just kind of lukewarm right now. I mean, you could even make it ahead of time and chill it and then blend it if you're a little worried, because it is kind of crazy when you blend hot liquids. You don't really want to fill it up too high.
What about
go ahead.
What about using an immersion blender? Do you think that would be a good option to puree this right? You could puree it.
I've tried using an immersion blender on this, and I feel like it doesn't make it smooth and creamy. I mean, it depends on the quality of your. I have a BlendTech blender. So if you have a good quality blender, it'll turn out super smooth and luxurious. But if you want to try it, it depends on how chunky you like it, right?
Yep.
Now I haven't put any salt and pepper in this yet, because I want to blend it up first and see how it tastes. We'll usually taste it first. Perfect. It's great, nice and thick. Now I normally would add all the rest of this to it, but we will, for sake of time, we will do that later. Add a little salt and pepper to this. And the kind of salt I'm using today is sea salt. Like using that because it provides a little bit of extra minerals into your diet. Regular salt, kosher salt is fine as well. So I'm going to taste this for seasoning. Probably a little more cayenne pepper, but I think it's great. So I'm gonna get a bowl.
So again, soup is a really good way, if for various reasons or for various people, right? If you feel like you have a hard time eating high fiber meals or vegetables, soup can be a very good option. A lot of my people who have gastroparesis will lean on soups to help them, have nutrient dense foods in an easy to digest way. Another great thing, we already talked about this, soup is low FODMAP. So if you're FODMAP sensitive or on the elimination phase of the low FODMAP diet, then this is a nice recipe to have in your toolbox. This recipe, as long as you're using a gluten-free vegetable broth, this is a gluten-free recipe. It's actually free of the top 8 allergens. So I really feel it's a good go-to for a lot of reasons. And it also freezes quite well. So if you are into meal prepping and you like to prepare a large batch of something and freeze meals, then you kind of have your own quick heat and eat meal for the future.
Absolutely. So here's your finished product. I have a little cilantro on the side, but you can also garnish it with parsley. I like to make my food, obviously we eat with our eyes, so I like to make it as pretty as possible. You can swirl some yogurt in this if you'd like. I mean, if you don't have a problem with dairy, but that's your ginger carrot soup on the low FODMAP diet right there. Okay, so the next recipe is the quinoa tabbouleh salad, and this is a great recipe for a quick lunch or dinner. It goes great with the ginger carrot soup. It's a great combination, super refreshing. There's a little bit of chopping involved, but it makes a nice quantity of salad last a really long time in your refrigerator, and you've got a fresh, lovely salad that's got quinoa in it, all kinds of fresh veggies, and we'll get started on that recipe right now. So So I've already prepared the quinoa, and the recipe calls for 1 cup of quinoa. I like to cook my quinoa 2 cups water or chicken broth or veggie broth to 1 cup of the quinoa. Let it cook, let bubbles come up to the top, just to the top, turn the heat off, put the top on, and let it sit for 15 or 20 minutes, and it fluffs perfectly. And that's how I like to make my rice too, and it always seems to come out perfectly cooked and fluffy. So here's my quinoa. So that's how it looks when it's perfectly cooked.
And that looks great.
Yep, super fluffy. You want all those little tails to show. And this particular recipe, let me move this over.
So one thing I would want to highlight, so with quinoa, because we're not going to see you cook it, and it's pretty straightforward, like she had just explained. Sometimes you might want to rinse your quinoa. So rinsing removes quinoa's natural coating called saponin, and this can make quinoa taste bitter or soapy. However, I will say most quinoa that I see in boxes or in packages, it's already been pre-rinsed. You don't have to rinse it before cooking, but if you buy it in, say, like a bulk section at a store, you are going to want to rinse it off, or if your package or box doesn't say pre-rinsed, I would definitely make sure you rinse your quinoa before cooking.
Well, and you know what, too, Emily, it's a great habit to be in, just to rinse all your grains. Like I rinse the rice that I put in the soup, because the machinery that grinds or mills these particular grains, little debris gets in there. It gets dusty. You've got little pebbles in here. Who knows what's in here? This is the brand that I like. This Trader Joe's, the tricolor quinoa. I like to use this a lot because it really makes a pretty salad.
Yeah.
So this is a great product. But yeah, I mean, I just got in the habit of rinsing pretty much everything that I make. Barley, millet, every type of grain or seed that I like to use for recipes, just to get whatever debris and dust from it, from whatever the processing process, you know.
Absolutely. I do the same thing.
Exactly. So we've got the quinoa already prepared. The recipe calls for super, super simple dressing. It's basically garlic infused olive oil and lemon juice. And I showed you already how to do the infusion of the olive oil. So I've already done that for you, so I don't have to repeat that. So I've got that. So I'm going to start with my dressing first, and then I'll chop my, rinse this off a little bit.
One other thing. So I think it's great to infuse your own garlic infused olive oil at home. Sherry demonstrated how simple and easy it is. I will also say you can buy garlic infused olive oil should you want a large bottle or like a reservoir on hold, for an easy use in your kitchen. So olive oil shops will carry it, and various grocery stores. If you just look in the olive oil section, there is now, even if you're on the low FODMAP diet and the elimination phase, or once you find out your triggers through the challenges, and again, if garlic is an issue for you, there is a company called Foddy that makes, their entire line is low FODMAP products, and they have a really good garlic infused olive oil that's, we've also used.
Yeah, that's probably the best one that I've tasted so far, besides homemade. Yeah, I agree, Emily. Great idea. So I'm going to add my lemon juice, 1 lemon juiced. And I've got my garlic infused olive oil. And I like to salt and pepper my dishes in phases. So I will put a little layer of salt and pepper here. My salt, here it is. Just a little bit there. So I've got the dressing waiting for me while I chop everything else up. So that's done. So the recipe calls for grape tomatoes. And, I still have some tomatoes coming out of my garden that I didn't want to go to waste. So I'm going to use those instead. And my tomatoes are here. And I just wanted to show you the best way, because I don't want this. There's seeds and juice, and obviously tomatoes have the seeds and juice, and tomatoes are really high in vitamins and all kinds of good stuff. But I don't want this salad recipe to be soupy. So I want to get rid of beautiful tomato from my garden and basically just cut it in half and just use your fingers. I mean, obviously, if you don't have tomatoes, you could buy the grape tomatoes and slice those in half, and that's super easy. But since I had a whole bunch of them left over, I might as well make good use of them. Taste delicious. So taking out all the seeds and juice just so it's not all soupy. So, I mean, I have a friend who drinks this, and she's a super healthy person, but I don't really want it in my salad dressing. So going to slice my tomatoes, and you want to slice them from the inside out because the skin is going to kind of catch on your knife. So let's make it easy and slice it from the inside out and then dice it. So it'll be a little smaller dice than the grape tomatoes. That'll be a little bit larger. But like the grated carrots that are in here, those are pretty small. The cucumbers I've cut up pretty small, so I'll show you. So there's my tomatoes. Clear that off. my cucumbers. I already cut a few cucumbers up. The recipe calls for a large English or hothouse cucumber, but I find that I like these smaller Persian cucumbers better. And sometimes I will, peel them just a little bit to make them look a little bit more, kind of make a little stripe pattern on them, make them look a little prettier. Get rid of that. And then top and tail it. You're gonna wanna cut it down the middle. Cut it again. And so you've got your cucumbers. That's probably going to be plenty. And you can obviously buy your carrots already shredded if you'd like. Since I had so many extra carrots from that large batch that I purchased for the carrot soup, I thought I would do it myself. So you have a little grater. This is my little grater. There's a lot of cool graters on the market. If you have a food processor and you'd rather do it in your food processor, when I have large amounts to grate, I'll use my food processor. But this does the trick for this small amount that I need. So that should be plenty of carrots for that recipe. Okay, so I've got my dressing, and let's see. I'm gonna go ahead and add all this to the dressing, and then I'll chop up my herbs and add that next. So we've got the tomatoes. Cucumbers. Carrots. And this salad is super colorful. This is a great salad to take to any potluck. It's perfect. So let's get rid of this. Now, I like to wash my herbs right when I get home from the grocery store because, they go to bad so quickly in the refrigerator. And it seems this method of washing them ahead of time and wrapping them in paper towel, I've been able to get my herbs to stay fresh for a week, week and a half. And just, it's awesome to be able to use them and not have them sit in a plastic bag or however else they're stored and have them just kind of wilt and turn to mush. So my parsley and my mint, I have a lovely salad spinner. I hope you have one too. Use this to wash everything that I bring home. I'll take my mint, submerge it in water, rinse it a couple of times, spin it dry, put it in the paper towel, and that way it lasts me for a really long time. So we've got the mint, and we've got the parsley. I'll just take a hunk and chop that up for you really quick. This recipe calls for about a cup of parsley. And it's all, I don't mind the stems. The stems are going to be chopped up pretty finely. You just want to chop it in alternating motion just till you get them to the size that you like. And I like to use Italian parsley for this dish. Regular parsley is a little picky, some little picky ends to it, so this Italian parsley works great for this dish. Okay, that looks good. Put that in there. This recipe also calls for a half a cup of mint, chopped mint, which really makes it fresh. So let's got a nice batch of mint here. And if you can cook with herbs as much as possible, please try to do that, because just the oils and the nutrients that come from fresh herbs is just outstanding for your body and also for your taste buds, because the flavor is amazing.
Yeah, so herbs are, yes, they're a good source of certain vitamins, but you know, I usually say their true power lies in the polyphenols, and these are different plant compounds that have potent antioxidant and anti-inflammatory effects. And plus, they just make your meal taste so much better, right?
Exactly. Exactly. All right, so I've got my herbs in there, and I think the last thing I'm waiting for, let me roll up my parsley here, because I'll be using that for the next week or so, is my green onions. And obviously we're trying to keep this a GI friendly recipe, so I'm just going to be using the tops of the green onions today. The recipe calls for 3 bunches. I kind of find like that's a little overwhelming for this particular recipe, so I have 2 of them, and sometimes I even just use 1. It just depends on how oniony you want it to make it. So I'm going to take off the very top of them and just kind of cut on the diagonal. And I also washed these, because these tend to gather a lot of dirt and debris as well. So I wash these under the water as well. Okay.
Yep, and that's just, again, a FODMAP hack to get onion flavoring without the FODMAP, the fructan. You can use the green tops of spring onions as well as chives. And if you're watching this and you don't have an issue with FODMAPs, then use the whole onion. Maybe you use a little bit less, but there's no reason not to use onion or garlic, unless, of course, again, you're doing the low FODMAP elimination phase, or you know you have a sensitivity to that.
Exactly. Okay, so I think I have everything in there. Yeah, I've got it all. I'm gonna add a little more salt and pepper to it, freshly ground pepper. So I'm gonna mix that up before I put the quinoa in. It's already looking good. Very colorful.
So much color.
And you know, it's all a ratio of what you like. This might be too much quinoa for you. This might be just like, nah, it's a little much. I like to have more veggies than the quinoa, and that's however you like it. So I may even use half of what I just made. So be aware, it does make a lot of quinoa. Let's see how that looks.
I would say there's also a benefit to making extra quinoa, right? So you've got some quinoa for this recipe, and then maybe you've got some for, you know, another recipe that you're making. Batch cooking for sure, saves time.
Absolutely. And we've got plenty of recipes on the mHealthy website that you can use already cooked quinoa. We've got a lemon, parsley, olive, quinoa cakes that are on there, and just a lot of really yummy salads, other salads that have different flavors, Southwest flavors and all that good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, that's the ratio. This is the ratio that I like. And if it's a little sour, it's up to you. You can add a little bit of maple syrup to this, or if you can tolerate honey, you can put a little bit of honey in this to sweeten it up a little bit. But I think this, and let's see how that tastes.
This is also another gluten-free meal, suitable for people who have celiac disease. We've talked about the low FODMAP, free of top 8 allergens. It's a vegan meal, right? Suitable for vegan and vegetarian diets.
Absolutely. That is refreshing. So I'm going to go ahead and plate that up. And I've got a little bit of parsley that I want to put on here. Sprig of parsley. So we've got that going on with the soup. Take this away. So far, that's your colorful lunch or dinner that we have prepared.
Soup and salad.
And let's move on to the smoothie. Hey, smoothie, is it good to have in the morning? I mean, what?
I would say it's not so much about the time of the day of drinking this, but it's more, you know, taking it and or taking some of the individual ingredients that are in the smoothie consistently that may help with bowel movements or may help with constipation. So the smoothie is really the brainchild of a physician that I work with, Dr. Che. And, you know, we'll talk a little bit about the ingredients, like why certain ingredients were chosen. And this is a smoothie that we have a recipe, you know, printed or typed out, and we give to our patients. See if they want to try it and see if it helps with their constipation. I will also say, you know, from experience working, you know, with this smoothie and the various ingredients, it doesn't cause diarrhea, which is also, you know, an important thing. So I don't find that it swings people over to the opposite direction.
So it's just kind of provides some softening fluids, or what would you say?
So let's talk about the ingredients that are in this smoothie. Do you have them all there?
Yeah, hold on one second. Let me get my cutting board. So yeah, so I was going to start with the papaya.
Okay. So the ingredients in this smoothie, you know, are kiwi fruit, aloe vera juice, papaya, and kefir. So we'll kind of chat about each of these. You know, each ingredient, you know, may be beneficial for relaxation for different reasons. And so combining them all together, you know, can create a concoction, again, that may help with constipation. So papayas, I feel like that's not a super common fruit that many people seek out when they're at the grocery store, right?
Yeah, I don't think so either. I think most people gravitate towards like mangoes, or a lot of people don't even know haven't had a kiwi before either.
Right. So papayas contain a natural enzyme, papain, and thus can aid in digestion. It's also a good source of fiber, right? Because it's a fruit, it's got high water content, both which can help prevent constipation and promote regularity. Now, it's interesting that you mentioned mango, because mango is another fruit that I would substitute in place of papaya if somebody wanted to do that. We use papaya in this, you know, recipe. Papaya is also low in FODMAP. So for our FODMAP sensitive people, somebody who has IBS-C or IBS constipation, you know, this is a low FODMAP smoothie recipe. But mango could be substituted in place of papaya. I also, you know, if somebody doesn't like papaya or can't find it, then I also suggest pineapple as a substitute as well.
Gotcha. So I just topped and tailed it, and of course has some lovely seeds which kind of get all over the place, so you kind of have to corral them all in. But take a nice large bowl and scoop out all the seeds, and there's like some fibrous bits and pieces in there that you can get out. So that one. I've got another one. And because I wanted to make some of this fruit frozen, I like to use the least amount of ice possible for my smoothies. I like to have them be kind of more naturally icy and cold by having frozen the fruit. I have already cut one up, or I think it was like a half of one or a cup of, so I've already frozen that so I can put that in my smoothie and hopefully use a little bit less ice. So that is done. And so if you want to just slice this up, this one is nice and soft. And really easily, kind of nice and sturdy. You can just slice along the skin there so you can get your chunks.
I think it's such a pretty color.
Isn't it gorgeous? It's not even a color that I feel like is on the chart. It's like a combination of so many things.
Yeah.
Beautiful. And obviously very high in antioxidants, being this color.
Absolutely.
So, and then you would just chop it up, put it in a bowl and freeze it. So you've got your amount of papaya that you would need for this recipe. But I'm going to use my frozen papaya that I already cut up. So I'm going to add that. Hopefully I can get it out of here. Uh-oh. You warm it up. Well, maybe we'll use our other papaya that we already cut. How's that sound? Because I think I stuck it to the bowl. So we'll put that papaya in here. And then I've got where'd it go? My kiwi. And when you choose a kiwi, you don't want it to be too mushy, but you don't want it to be rock solid. You want to just put take a little dent when you squeeze pinch with your fingers, it just has a little dent to it. And you know that it's ripe and ready to be cut. So I'm going to top and tail this.
Right. And so when people think about kiwi fruit, I don't think that most people know that kiwi fruit may also help with constipation. And we know this because there are several small studies that have demonstrated that eating 2 kiwi fruit per day improve constipation.
Just eating the kiwi fruit.
Yep. So if you don't like smoothies, you're not a smoothie person, and you just want to try eating the kiwi fruit, I would say the therapeutic amount that we would have you try or start with is going to be 2 kiwi. That provides about 4 grams of fiber, and it may be that the fiber in kiwi, because it has a high water holding capacity, that might play a role. We don't exactly know the mechanism, because people always ask, well, why kiwi?
Right.
I wish I knew the exact answer. We think it might be because of, again, fiber and water holding content. There's also another enzyme in papaya called, or I'm not in papaya, but in kiwi fruit called actinidin. And so that might play a role in helping with constipation through various mechanisms. So yeah, more on that. Hopefully we'll find out more from some upcoming research actually out of our group at Michigan Medicine looking at kiwi fruit and constipation.
Perfect. Well, I just know it tastes great. So love it, love it. And I have half a cup of kefir here that I'm going to put in to give it the creaminess.
Yeah, so you can use kefir. I mean, it's a good source of probiotics. Most kefir is lactose free, so if you're lactose intolerant, that will be fine. And if you don't do dairy, I mean, you can buy a plant-based kefir as well. It's, there's so many options now out there.
And then I've got my aloe vera juice, 1/3 cup of that.
Yep, and the rationale behind that is aloe vera juice also has a natural compound that can act as a laxative.
And let's see, is my ice gonna come out of here? Let's see. And I think that's it. I mean, I think if your fruit wasn't super sweet, you might want to add a tablespoon or two of maple syrup.
Mhm.
You don't necessarily have to do that, but this papaya and this kiwi is pretty sweet and so it's pretty juicy. So I feel like I'll be happy with this. Let's see. Oh, it's very, very frothy. Good, perfect amount of ice and fruit. So I've got a little glass here. Oh my gosh, Emily, this looks fantastic.
That's beautiful.
I cannot wait to try it. Got a little, like I said, we're eating with our eyes, right?
So
we got a
important.
little orange slice there. And I'm super excited to try this. Cheers, everyone. Oh my gosh, that's wonderful. Thank you for this.
Yay.
And that completes our demo for today. Hope you enjoyed it. We really enjoyed it. We really miss teaching our in-person classes together. Miss you, Emily.
I know. And I wish we were all together. I mean, just, the whole group with IFFGD. But in the future, and again, we're so thankful for this opportunity to still be able to share these recipes with you guys today. We hope you like them, try them out, give us some feedback. We're always looking for that.
Yeah. And thank you, everyone, and have a great day.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. Have a good
Thanks,
one.
Emily.
Thanks, Sherry.
Hi, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that cooking demonstration. Again, remember, we do have a program booklet that is downloadable from our event page on the IFFGD website, which is iffgd.org. It's only about 16 pages. It's really not this big, just to let you know. This is just a binder so that you can see it standing up. It's only about 16 pages long, but it does include inside that the recipes that you were able to just listen to, and then also a few extra bonus smoothie recipes, and then a lot of information about the faculty, people you're hearing from today, and then also the patient story from Erin Slater you'll be hearing from later on. I believe they put a link to that chat in, to that program guide in the chat. And talking about chat, what a great enthusiastic audience we have here today, and thank you so much for your questions, your comments, your encouragement to one another. It's been really great to see. And for those of you that aren't able to see the chat, or maybe you're just listening in your car, let's do a real kind of quick synopsis of some of the questions that we had. So some of the questions we heard in the chat during the cooking demonstration were,
Is there an alternative chicken broth I can find that does not include garlic, onion, tomato, things that our GI patients can't have?
Yeah, so the question was whether or not there's an alternative to the broth, vegetable broth or chicken broth that was used in the recipe. So one, you can definitely make your own broth. Obviously, that's pretty work intensive. So if you prefer not to do that, there's a company called Foddy Foods. They have a low FODMAP broth that many of our patients use and find to be tolerable and quite good. I think there was another question about whether or not celery root can be found year-round. Celery root was used as the starch in the soup that was made by Sherry and Emily. Celery root can generally be found year-round and isn't necessarily seasonal, but if it's kind of difficult to find or you're not familiar with cooking with that, then you can use a russet potato that's really readily available and is also low in FODMAP.
And another question we had was, can I replace quinoa with farro? And if not, are there other grains that are FODMAP friendly?
So farro is not, so you can definitely make that substitution. using quinoa to farro, and I think it would probably taste pretty good, given the consistency of the farro. However, FODMAP is actually an ancient form of wheat, and it is not FODMAP friendly. So if you have an intolerance to FODMAPs, then I would probably recommend using the quinoa as recommended, or even a wild rice. I think there was another question about what grains are FODMAP friendly, and Emily Holler is one of our GI dietitians here at Michigan Medicine, and she's going to go into that in great detail in the next talk. But briefly, grains that are FODMAP friendly would be corn, potato, rice, and oats are kind of like the bigger ones. And then you could get, and quinoa as well. But we can get into a little bit more in that after the presentation.
Great, and actually Emily Holler will be coming up right after our next break, and what we're going to do is we're going to break until 12:30, and so that gives us about 10 minutes, and so this will give you a chance to, I know that cooking demonstration probably made you hungry, get you something to eat, something to drink, and then meet us back here at 12:30, and we'll kick off with Emily Holler's presentation right at 12:30. Thank you so much.
right, welcome back. I hope you all enjoyed your break. We're going to go straight to Emily Holler. Her talk is Sugars, Friend or Foe. She's a registered dietitian with expertise in treating GI conditions. Take it away, Emily.
Hello, everyone. My name is Emily Haller, and I am a registered dietitian. I work with the Division of Gastroenterology at Michigan Medicine, and I'm very excited to be here with you today talking about a pretty hot topic, sugar, friend or foe. So let's get started. All right, there we go. So to begin with, what is sugar? Sugar is a generalized name for short-chain, sweet, soluble carbohydrates. Sugars can be categorized as monosaccharides, meaning one sugar, or disaccharides, meaning two sugars. They can be naturally occurring or added to foods, come from various sources. So naturally occurring sugars are found in foods like fruit, for example, fructose and glucose, and then milk also contains a natural sugar called lactose. Added sugars are sugars and syrup that are put into foods during preparation or processing. They can be added at the table or to different drinks, beverages, and some common sources of those are high fructose corn syrup, molasses, cane sugar, corn sweetener, and different fruit juice concentrates. So first, I wanted to talk a little bit about sugar recommendations for general health. So it is recommended to limit refined carbohydrates and added sugars. So we're not talking about natural sugars here, definitely not talking about fruit, but limiting added sugars and refined carbohydrates is recommended because diets rich in these things, particularly added sugars, have been shown to promote inflammation and increase risk for the following conditions. So non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, insulin resistance and diabetes, high triglycerides, and heart disease, as well as cancer. So let's take a look at how much sugar we are eating. Well, the average American consumes a pretty significant amount of sugar, around 17 teaspoons, which is 68 grams of added sugar per day. So if we look over here at this pie chart on the right, we'll see that beverages, and we're not talking about milk or 100% fruit juice, but sweetened beverages contribute to the majority of added sugars, as well as snacks and sweets. The rest of these things are pretty small. So if we're trying to look at, are we consuming a lot of sugar? These would be the two categories to look at first. The American Heart Association recommends the following daily added sugar limit. So I'm not here to demonize sugar, not telling you that you can't enjoy some sweets and treats that you like. Those things can definitely fit. But looking at for males, about 9 teaspoons or 36 grams a day is a daily added sugar limit. And then for women, 24 grams or 6 teaspoons is what's recommended. Again, the good news, whole foods like fruits, vegetables, whole grains, nuts, seeds, and legumes do not have added sugars. And when we have these things in our diet, for the most part, we don't have to worry too much about going over these limits. So what about sugar and GI symptoms? Can sugars cause GI symptoms? This is a common question I get asked from my patients. And the short answer is yes, for some people, and it depends. So we're going to chat a little bit about specific sugar intolerances for the rest of this talk, and we're going to be going over these different sugars. So starting with sucrose and maltose as well as starch. There is a condition called congenital sucrase isomaltase deficiency, or CSID, that makes it difficult for a person to digest certain sugars, which are sucrose, also known as table sugar. And you can see over here that that is a disaccharide. It's made up of 2 sugars, glucose and fructose. Maltose, which is often found in barley malt, corn syrup, and rice syrup, also a disaccharide made up of 2 sugars of glucose. And then people who have CSID may also have a hard time with starch. And this is found, in a lot of common foods, potatoes, pastas, breads, all the good things. And there's a pretty complex digestion process behind this, but it's broken down to maltose and dextrin. And for us to be able to digest these sugars, we need an enzyme called sucrase isomaltase. And you can see over here in a normal intestine, when somebody's eating sugar and this enzyme is present, those two sugars are broken apart and they're able to be absorbed through the small intestine and metabolized by the body. Therefore, normal digestion. Now, if somebody doesn't have this enzyme, this sugar is not able to be broken down. So it swims down through the GI tract, it makes it to the large intestine, and we all have bacteria that live in our large intestine, that's normal. But these bacteria are going to ferment that sugar, and that can produce a lot of gas, and bloating, pain, and it can lead to urgency, loose frequent bowel movements, or diarrhea. And all of those symptoms are common in many GI conditions, which we'll chat about a little bit at the end. But those are symptoms in somebody who has CSID, who's eating a lot of sugar or maltose and or starch. So if somebody has this, if you're diagnosed with this condition by your physician, then there are some treatment nutrition therapy options. So we can use a diet along with an enzyme called saccharosidase. This will help with sugar tolerance and digestion, or sucrose tolerance and digestion. And then if someone is not taking an enzyme, then we would have them limit their sucrose intake for a couple of weeks to assess how much they improve, and then reintroduce sucrose containing foods to really hone in on a person's specific tolerance. In terms of tolerating starch, there is not an enzyme for starch digestion. So this may need to be limited. And then there's also some tips and tricks that can be applied to try to improve starch tolerance. Some of those things look like boiling, cooking well starchy foods, rinsing them to rinse away some of the starch. Combining protein and fat with starch-containing foods may improve tolerance. And then chewing foods well may also improve starch tolerance, because there are enzymes in saliva that help break down starch. So moving on to FODMAP. So FODMAP is an umbrella term for specific short-chain carbohydrates. It's an acronym. As you can see here, it's a mouthful: fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. Again, these are short-chain carbohydrates or short-chain sugars. They can be poorly absorbed in the small intestine, just how we looked at that sucrose example earlier. And if they're delivered to the large intestine, they can be rapidly fermented by gut bacteria, producing a whole host of symptoms. They can draw water into the GI tract, which can also increase urgency, diarrhea, loose frequent bowel movements. So let's look at each one of these individually. Lactose is a sugar that's found in dairy products. It's a disaccharide, and it's normally broken down by an enzyme called lactate. Lactose intolerance is very common. About 65% of the world's population is somewhat lactose intolerant. And so if you don't have this enzyme, you will have an impaired ability to digest lactose, which will lead to a lot of GI symptoms. So the treatment for this is one, to find your specific tolerance level, right? Different dairy products have different levels of lactose. So for example, milk has the most lactose, whereas something like hard cheese or butter, those are essentially lactose-free or very, very low lactose. Or something like a yogurt or Greek yogurt is kind of middle of the road. So finding, again, a specific tolerance level can be important. There are also alternatives available. So soy milk, almond milk, there's different plant-based yogurts, ice creams, you name it. If dairy isn't your thing, or you feel like you're very sensitive, there's pretty much a workaround for every product. You can also try the use of an enzyme. A lactase enzyme would provide you that enzyme. You take it at the time that you're consuming regular dairy products, and that may help improve your tolerance. You can also buy products available in most grocery stores that have already been treated with the enzyme, and those are, for example, lactose-free milk. There's also some research to say or to show that probiotics and prebiotics may help with lactose intolerance as well. Fructose, also a FODMAP. This is the monosaccharide found naturally in fruits and honey. It's in some veggies, and then it's also added to various products, which you may be familiar with, high fructose corn syrup, for example, or crystalline fructose. The ability of the human intestine to absorb fructose is limited. So if consuming too much at one time, this can create symptoms for certain people. There's also people who have fructose malabsorption and are very sensitive to high fructose intake. If this is the case, you're going to notice a lot of the interventions are similar. It's going to be first to limit intake, see if this helps with symptoms, and then to try to reintroduce certain foods to find a specific tolerance, right? Find what specifically works for you, or in my case, what works for my patients when I'm working with them. If needing to avoid high fructose foods, there are, again, various fruits and vegetables and different sweeteners. And then anytime, I'm talking with someone about avoiding food, right, that may be their trigger, we also want to think about what can we have instead. So, for a list of fruits, we're going to put these on hold. We would also want to focus on what fruits don't have excess fructose, what could be added in place of the things that we're taking out. There's not really an enzyme to take for fructose malabsorption or intolerance, so it's more about limiting, finding a specific tolerance, and foods that work for you. Oligosaccharides, also a short chain carbohydrate, also part of the low FODMAP diet, but technically not a sugar. So these are very common in our diet. They're found in things like wheat, rye, and barley, garlic and onions, beans. And the intolerance here is that no humans make the digestive enzymes to completely break these down. So these are fermented in everybody. That's normal, that's healthy. However, some people may be more sensitive to this, primarily people who have irritable bowel syndrome or IBS. And in the case that if we find we are sensitive to the fructooligosaccharides or galactooligosaccharides, or the fructans, the FODMAP, specific FODMAP group, the intervention would be to limit intake as much as needed, try to add them back to find a specific tolerance. There is some interesting research to show people with IBS who reacted to the beans, the galactooligosaccharide group, could take a digestive enzyme called alpha galactosidase. It's the same enzyme that's in Beano. So taking that at the same time of eating beans can help improve tolerance and lessen symptoms. So that's always an option. Beano's one. I've listed some other enzymes up there on the slide that you may find in a grocery store, health food store, or online. And then, of course, finding alternatives that work. So if somebody reacts to wheat bread, a sourdough bread is a good option, workaround. Garlic infused olive oil in place of regular garlic, green onion tops, chives, etc. So last but not least, sugar alcohols, also known as polyols, are a naturally occurring carbohydrate. These are sweeteners that have about half of the calories of a regular sugar. They are found naturally in nature in the forms of sorbitol and mannitol. They're in apples and apricots, avocado, cauliflower, peaches, plums, and prunes. And then they're also found in sugar-free products like sugar-free gum and sugar-free candy. So you can see over here in the table, a good way to spot sugar alcohols on a label is to look for that OL, sorbitol, xylitol, mannitol, maltitol. And the intolerance here is that these can have a laxative effect. Some people are, sensitive to a small amount, and then generally, most people, if you consume a large amount of these sugar-free alcohols, that they can have a laxative effect in almost anyone. That can be seen if you go to the Amazon reviews of sugar-free gummy bears. There's some pretty comical reviews talking about some of the side effects that they can elicit. So the treatment and alternatives here are to limit intake initially, find a specific tolerance level. If you do find that you react to sugar-free alcohols and products, the alternative is to use actually real sugared gum. There's several companies that make them out there, or use real sugared candy and not the ones that are sugar-free. And then there are some Fruits and veggies, again, that can be limited or avoided as needed. So to wrap things up, I want to leave you with some unsugar-coated advice. If you are having GI symptoms and you think you have, a sugar or carbohydrate intolerance, please work with a physician for a proper workup, diagnosis, and ongoing care. If you are struggling with what to eat and you do have a sugar or other food intolerance, please work with a GI dietitian. While goals are specific to each individual, I find a lot of times the things that I'm working on in clinic with my people is that we're trying to expand the variety in diet while minimizing symptoms. And last but not least, please enjoy foods, including some with added sugars that you tolerate. Thank you very much, and I hope you found this helpful and enjoyed my talk.
Hi, and welcome back. Hope you enjoyed that talk by Emily Holler. We had some really interesting questions during that talk that came up, and so let's talk just for a second about the enzymes. So that was one that really stuck out as something that I was really curious about too. Shanti, what about these digestive enzymes?
So in normal GI physiology, normally in your gut, your pancreas makes enzymes to digest the macronutrients. So to digest the proteins, fats, and carbohydrates that we're eating every day. Sometimes patients may feel that they have an inability to break down certain foods, and there can be supplementary enzymes that can be available, either over the counter or prescription, that can really help with aiding the breakdown of these macronutrients. In some patients who have pancreatic insufficiency or are not making enough pancreatic enzymes, prescription enzymes can be really helpful. Also, though, people sometimes just feel like they're maybe not breaking down enough, and sometimes then they'll take supplementary pancreatic enzymes over the counter. And it's really not clear if that's all that helpful or not, but many patients may find it to be.
Okay.
It definitely won't hurt, I should say that.
Fantastic. I always have been curious about that myself. And when you go into the store, of course, you walk into the sections on digestive health in the grocery store, and there's just rows and rows and rows of options. And so it's probably a good thing to talk to your doctor or a dietitian or both. Who would be good to talk to?
I think that, most providers don't really have a great recommendation either way about that, but I would tell you, if you feel like it's helpful for you, go ahead and do that. If it's not helpful after 1 to 2 weeks of taking something regularly, it's probably not worth it just to keep doing that.
Okay, sounds fantastic. And then another question that came up during the chat was, how common is this sucrase isomaltate deficiency that Emily Holler spoke of in her video? Is that something that's very common?
So the short answer is no, not very common. Usually it's a condition that's diagnosed in infants and toddlers as they're starting to introduce food into their diet, transitioning from breast milk or formula. But we also know that there's probably less severe forms of that disease that won't necessarily be picked up until patients reach adulthood and are still having symptoms, or they may have minor sucrase isomaltase deficiency or mild condition coupled with something else. And so we're actually doing a lot of research to try to figure out what the true prevalence of sucrase isomaltase deficiency is in the adult population, because there probably is a lot of overlap with conditions like IBS.
Right. Okay. I hate to have to give up my sugars personally, but if it's an answer to what's causing the pain and all that discomfort, it would be great to know if that's the case. So good to know that there's testing available for that.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Sure. All right. So next up, we are going to have Dr. Joan Chen, and she is going to be speaking with us about esophageal disorders, and her talk is called Burning Questions on upper GI symptoms.
Hello, everyone. My name is Joan Chen. I am an assistant professor at Michigan Medicine, and I'm happy to be talking to you today about some burning questions you might have on upper GI symptoms. So on the agenda today, I will be going over some common upper GI symptoms, and we'll go over the symptoms. Some of the potential red flag symptoms or alarm symptoms to look out for that might point towards more serious gastrointestinal conditions that should be considered. And then we'll go over the functional GI diseases because today the focus, our emphasis is on functional GI conditions. And then we'll go over 2 patient cases, including their symptom presentation, their treatment, and workup history. I'll go over a brief medical management algorithm for these conditions. And then I will spend a little more time on evidence-based recommendations for dietary and lifestyle changes for each of these patients. So some of the upper GI symptoms that we see commonly might include heartburn, belching, regurgitation, upper abdominal pain, fullness, nausea, and bloating. So I first want to point out that there are some red flag symptoms that we should consider, and these include trouble swallowing, weight loss, bleeding, feeling full easily at the start of a meal, family history of esophageal or stomach cancer, or change in bowel habits. There are also some risk factors to consider, including large hiatal hernia history and family history of other GI conditions. These are considered alarm symptoms because they may point towards other GI conditions that we might want to work up, and those include gastroesophageal reflux disease with complications, esophageal tumor, eosinophilic esophagitis, esophageal and stomach ulcers, stomach tumor, H. pylori infection, gastroparesis, celiac sprue, and inflammatory bowel disease. I'm not going to go over details of these conditions because, again, we're focusing on functional GI diseases today. So what are functional GI diseases? And I'm sure you guys already know, but essentially these are GI conditions or GI symptoms with no detectable on either an anatomic level or microscopic level abnormalities found on diagnostic tests. These functional GI diseases can overlap with organic GI conditions, and management of functional GI diseases often includes lifestyle and dietary modification, either as primary or adjunct therapy. So the upper GI, functional GI diseases include these conditions here that I've listed, and they're globus, functional dysphagia, functional heartburn, functional chest pain, reflux hypersensitivity, functional dyspepsia, belching disorder, nausea and vomiting disorders, and finally rumination syndrome. Obviously, I don't have time to go over each and every one of these, but I do want to use a couple of cases to highlight some of the more common upper GI, functional GI disorders. So let's start with patient A. So this is a 43-year-old female with history of chest and throat burning, as well as belching after meals that worsens with stress. She's had it off and on for many years. She does not have these alarm symptoms, including trouble swallowing, weight loss, bleeding, concerning family histories. She did try using Prilosec over the counter for 4 weeks and had no improvement from this. And because after a proton pump inhibitor trial, she still had symptoms, further workup was done, and she had an upper endoscopy that essentially showed a normal esophagus, normal stomach, and normal small intestine, or the first part of the small intestine called the duodenum. And when patients continued to have symptoms and their endoscopy ruled out some of the worrisome conditions, we still wonder if they have acid reflux causing their symptoms. We oftentimes will use what's called reflux monitoring to actually measure the amount of acid that is seen in patients' distal esophagus. So she underwent what's called a 24-hour reflux monitor using a catheter that showed a normal amount of acid reflux that her distal esophagus is seeing. And so that essentially rules out acid reflux as a contributing factor to her symptoms and gave her a diagnosis of functional heartburn. I want to take a step back and just kind of go over reflux management in one slide. And obviously this is kind of a simplification, but it kind of gives you an overview of what we do in managing patients with reflux symptoms. So like I said earlier, oftentimes lifestyle and diet interventions are first recommended in patients with initial complaint of reflux. When there's no response to lifestyle or diet interventions, then we consider using medication. And oftentimes this will be the over-the-counter antacid or antihistamines like Pepcid, in addition to the lifestyle and diet interventions to treat their symptoms. If they still have no response to these medications, then we try something a little stronger, such as proton pump inhibitors. And these are medications like Prilosec or Nexium, in addition to lifestyle and dietary interventions to try to treat their symptoms. If they continue to have no response, like in this patient A, we will consider further testing to exclude other causes for their symptoms. And if those are ruled out, these patients are diagnosed with functional disorders, and we might use medications like a neuromodulator or try GI behavioral therapy with a GI psychologist, in addition, again, to lifestyle and dietary intervention to treat their symptoms. So as you can see, lifestyle and dietary interventions are really considered at each step of the way in managing a lot of these patients. So I'd like to go in a little more detail on dietary interventions first. So when it comes to diet and acid reflux, you can pretty much find information from people that you talk to or on the internet. And this is kind of the conventional wisdom, is to avoid a lot of different foods, including fried foods, unhealthy fats, citrus fruits, tomatoes, chocolate, refined sugar, spicy foods, caffeine, dairy products, peppermint, spearmint, carbonated drinks, a lot of different things. So what does the evidence actually show us, though? So I've organized here in this table what evidence-based recommendations are for acid reflux and diet. From the standpoint of alcohol, it has been shown that alcohol increases acid secretion and decreases esophageal motility, as well as impaired gastric emptying. So avoidance of alcohol in general is recommended for reflux. In terms of carbonated beverages, these have been shown to increase stomach distension, increase what's called transient lower esophageal sphincter relaxation, which is a mechanism causing acid reflux, as well as decrease the lower esophageal sphincter pressure and decrease, as a result, the esophageal pH. And so avoidance of carbonated beverages is also recommended based on evidence in the literature. What about high-fat meals? We also often tell people to avoid these. There is evidence that show that high-fat meals increase acid exposure time in the esophagus and decrease lower esophageal sphincters in some studies, but other studies did not show that. So the jury is still out in terms of whether high-fat meal avoidance should be recommended. Caffeine and chocolate, which is very important in a lot of people's well-being and quality of life, these have been shown to decrease lower esophageal sphincter pressure in some studies, but actually there are no evidence that show that avoidance of these foods actually cause benefit from reflux standpoint. So again, the recommendation is a little bit shaky on that in terms of strong evidence in the literature. When it comes to spicy foods, peppermints, and citrus, there's really no evidence that show worsening of acid reflux on reflux studies. There's also no evidence showing benefits of avoidance of these medications from reflux standpoint. So again, whether this should be recommended in terms of food avoidance or not in reflux patients is still questionable. What I usually tell patients is that the evidence show that we should avoid heavy use of alcohol and carbonated beverages if you have reflux symptoms. And then if you do have symptoms in response to specific foods, then you should probably use that in moderation or avoid it altogether. So moving on to all the other lifestyle recommendations, so I'll go over this table here. There is evidence that show that keeping the head of bed elevated at nights does improve the pH in the distal esophagus, as well as symptoms with fewer transient lower esophageal sphincter relaxation. Again, that leads to acid reflux. So head of bed elevation is recommended as a lifestyle intervention for reflux. Avoidance of late evening meals close to bedtime has been shown to improve nighttime reflux, although not symptoms. And quitting tobacco or tobacco cessation has been shown to improve in symptoms, especially in patients with a normal BMI. And then finally, weight loss has been shown to decrease gastric pressure, decrease hiatal hernia size, and decrease esophageal acid exposure. So all of these lifestyle recommendations or interventions are recommended based on the evidence in our literature. So moving on to our second patient, or patient B. This is a patient that is 56 years old with upper abdominal discomfort, including burning, pain, fullness for years. And this is worsened with eating, although not specific to any triggering foods. He does not have any nausea or vomiting, no weight loss, no bleeding, and no change in bowel habits. And there's no family history of GI cancers or inflammatory bowel disease. He was seen by a family medicine doctor and started on a trial of proton pump inhibitor of Prilosec 40 milligrams daily, used it for 4 months without any improvement. So further testing that was done included a upper endoscopy that did not show any ulcers or inflammation, and biopsies were negative for a stomach infection called H. pylori. Small bowel biopsies did not show celiac sprue or gluten allergy. And he also had a colonoscopy that was normal at age 50. And to round up the workup, he had normal liver and pancreatic enzymes and a normal right upper quadrant ultrasound, rolling out gallstones or other gallbladder biliary issues. So because of the negative workup, he was given a diagnosis of functional dyspepsia. So this is a condition that I would like to talk about next. Dyspepsia, the word literally means bad digestion, and it's very common, affecting about 10 to 20% of the Western population. So again, a quick slide on how we generally manage patients presenting with dyspepsia symptoms. So patients present with uninvestigated dyspepsia, we might first have them undergo an upper endoscopy to rule out causes like ulcers or stomach infections, small bowel pathologies like celiac sprue, and we might test and treat for H. pylori if that is positive. And we might also provide them with an empiric trial of proton pump inhibitor to reduce stomach acidity to take out that potential acid contribution factor. And we might also recommend lifestyle and dietary intervention concurrently to help them reduce symptoms. If the workup is negative, then they are given a diagnosis of functional dyspepsia. And the management from that, from there on, involves specific treatments depending on their presenting symptoms. For example, for patients with pain, we might use neuromodulators to reduce pain. Those with nausea might get anti-nausea medication, and those with more particular fullness after meals might get medications to treat gastric accommodation. And again, lifestyle and dietary intervention are also recommended, again, at this step of the management. So more on diet and functional dyspepsia. We do know that functional dyspepsia symptoms are oftentimes associated with a number of dietary variables. That these include total food intake, food volume, meal frequency, and specific foods. However, there are few clinical trials that have formally evaluated dietary interventions for the management of functional dyspepsia. I'm including here a systematic review that included 16 studies and it came up with some recommendations on specific dietary changes that one might want to follow in functional dyspepsia. So the study, the review concluded that wheat and gluten are associated with abdominal pain, bloating, and post-meal fullness. Dietary fat has been shown to induce symptoms of post-meal nausea, bloating, fullness, and pain. Alcohol, on the other hand, has shown inconsistent data in the literature. It has been shown to increase the odds for dyspepsia in one study, and in another study has been shown to induce symptoms after wine intake and beer intake of 68 and 62%. But the data, again, is a little inconsistent. Caffeine intake has been associated with symptom induction in greater than 50% of patients with functional dyspepsia in 4 studies, but no association was seen in another study. And finally, milk intake has been frequently shown to induce bloating after consumption. So that is the end of my talk. But just before I wrap up with the summary, I just want to say that whereas historically people are looking for quick fixes for their symptoms, and as you can see in this figure, people line up for pills and surgeries for quick fixes. I think over the last 5 years to a decade, there's been a major shift in people wanting to focus more on lifestyle changes and avoid long-term medication use and invasive procedures. And so I think this graphic is no longer true, and much more of our population are lining up behind the lifestyle changes. And so to summarize my talk, first, dietary and lifestyle changes may be the first step in management of functional upper GI symptoms and should definitely be considered. But any red flag symptoms, alarm symptoms, should trigger further or more urgent medical evaluation by a physician. Dietary recommendations for reflux include avoidance of alcohol and carbonated beverages, as well as potential other trigger foods dependent on the patient. And then lifestyle recommendations for reflux include smoking cessation, weight loss, avoidance of eating close to bedtime, and elevation of head of bed. And finally, cutting back on dietary gluten, dairy, fat, alcohol, and caffeine may help reduce symptoms in functional dyspepsia. And so these should be tried, but it may depend on the presenting symptoms of that specific patient. And that is the end of my talk. I hope you have enjoyed it and hope this is helpful. Thank you very much.
Welcome back to IFFGD's inaugural Norton Educational Series program, streamed live to you from the University of Michigan's Food for Life Kitchen. I'm here with Dr. Shanti Ezron as we have gone through this wonderful program about our bodies, our GI health and nutrition, and how all of that works together. Dr. Joan Chen, who's the director of the motility lab here at the University of Michigan, just gave our last talk about a lot of different esophageal disorders. We received some great questions, and ones that might take a few more minutes to answer than we really would have during our Q&A session right now, but we're planning to have a break right after this. And so what we thought we'd do is just let you know that we are going to resume our next talk on IBS with Dr. Justin Brandler. You don't want to miss that one. It's fantastic at 1:15. And so if you are interested in some of these questions that came up in chat, stick around just for a couple extra minutes. Otherwise, go ahead and take your break, and we'll see you again at 1:15. Very first question. So someone talked about overlapping disease states, Dr. Ezron, having a family member that has Parkinson's disease but are having some GI issues as well. Are things like that important to tell your doctor?
So absolutely, every time we see a new patient, the provider will ask you about your symptoms, but also about your past medical history. And, the reason why we asked about that is because a lot of disease states can overlap or cause GI symptoms. Mm-hmm. So, for example, Parkinson's disease is primarily a neurologic and motor disease, but it can have profound effects on gut motility. And so if a patient is having GI symptoms with that medical history, that's really important for the provider to be aware of that.
Okay. That's good to know, because a lot of times you think when you're talking to a gastroenterologist that all they care about is your gut. Right. So good for us to take notes as patients to make sure that we do that moving forward. The next question we had was about PPI use and talked about long-term PPI use. And does it have an association or a risk for later developing either SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or irritable bowel syndrome?
That is a question I get a lot in terms of the side effects of proton pump inhibitors. And there's been a lot of popular press about the use of long-term PPIs. People have cited dementia, kidney disease, stomach cancer, infections, and in general, the association between all of those things is very, very weak. And so if you are getting benefit from your proton pump inhibitor, it's important to keep taking it. If you don't think it's helping you, many times it could be okay to discontinue that altogether. In terms of the side effects associated with PPIs, one of them that I hear a lot is diarrhea and bloating. And so in some people, it can make their IBS worse a little bit, or it can actually have a true side effect of diarrhea and bloating related to that use. The question about small intestinal bacterial overgrowth is an interesting one. There's been a few studies that suggest maybe an increased risk, but also a few studies that definitely do not demonstrate any increased risk of small bowel overgrowth. And so, again, every medication we take, we need to really look to see, is it needed? And if so, how long is it needed? Maybe we can safely come off some of these medications. So I think it's always good to keep asking that question. But there is not like a clear relationship at this point that we can see between IBS and small bowel overgrowth.
Okay. So I have a question, Shanti. So I've been reading a little bit about PPI and COVID and the GI symptoms with COVID, and that you run a risk with the increased PPI usage and the decrease of acid production in your stomach, therefore makes you more at risk of the COVID being able to grow. Is there any science to that, or are we still researching?
No, I think there is. There's one study that demonstrated an increased risk of getting COVID if you were exposed to it, if you were on a PPI at the time. It doesn't necessarily make your risk of getting severe disease any worse or better, but there is at least a weak correlation that does go along with that. I would stress that was one paper that came out. Things are constantly changing and evolving in this space. But then again, it's just one more reason to really take a look at your list of medications.
Absolutely.
And see, do I need to keep taking this?
Absolutely.
And if I feel like I want to come off of it, what is the best way to do that?
Maybe the lesson learned is now is a good time to have another appointment with your gastroenterologist. Maybe you've been on a PPI for 15, 20 years and you haven't thought any more about it, and maybe it's time to sit down and make sure that you're taking the medications you need to.
Right.
And that you are, if you don't need to be taking it, maybe you could take something else or whatever. So
yeah.
Talking to your doctor is always really important. So we've got a couple minutes before 1:15. We're going to let you guys just take a break from us for just 1 or 2 minutes,
yeah.
and then we're going to come right back and we're going to be ready to talk about irritable bowel syndrome.
Hello, my name is Dr. Justin Brandler. I'm a gastroenterology fellow at the University of Michigan. Thanks so much to the IFFGD for inviting me to speak to you all today about IBS. I'm really hoping that today provides you a lot of really practical tools to live your best IBS life. I know this condition can be really incapacitating for some patients, and really trying to provide you some hope as we work through this process together. So providing some practical tools here to beat the battle with your bowels. So first we'll start with what IBS is. So many of you already know, as you're watching this, it stands for Irritable Bowel Syndrome. Pretty central to the diagnosis is some component of abdominal pain or discomfort that's associated with abnormal bowel movements. Usually these are related to constipation or diarrhea, but actually there are some criteria that are for neither constipation or diarrhea, or both, as we often see, and that condition is often called IBS mixed. It's got very complex physiology that we're continuing to discover more and more about as the years and the research evolves. I think it's also really helpful to talk about what IBS is not. So inflammatory bowel disease, or IBD, is something that we always kind of have in the back of our minds that we want to make sure that we're not missing. But that is specifically Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, microscopic colitis. Also, it's important to recognize and to state that IBS is not fatal, okay? It doesn't affect the quantity of your life, but this by no means diminishes the impact that it can have on your quality of life. Finally, IBS is not all in your head, okay? I'm sure, unfortunately, many of you maybe have been told by other providers, maybe even other gastroenterologists, that, what you're experiencing is all in your head, and, we do these tests and they're negative. And I really want to encourage you and provide you hope that both myself, as well as so many other providers that I work with, don't believe that this is all in your head, that you're truly experiencing these symptoms. However, I also think it's so important to recognize that the brain does contribute actually a lot to the problems that we see in IBS, and we'll dive into this more later. And we're actually starting to brand functional GI disease, is what IBS falls under, into more of these disorders of brain-gut interaction or brain-gut microbiome interaction. As we go forward, it's more descriptive of what the condition entails. So now we're going to dive into hopefully a really practical approach that will empower you in your next visit with your provider to get you both on the same page and meeting your goals together. So before that visit, you really want to organize your thoughts and your experiences surrounding your IBS. So I know notebooks can be really helpful for self-reflection, for discovering triggers. I have some patients who have very detailed binders that have tabs of different things. The problem with that is that notebooks often aren't really that helpful during limited office visits. And I always feel bad if I have to say, well, I appreciate that you're so thoughtful about your care. That's wonderful. But if we go through each of these different fine points, it's going to detract from the time and the quality time I really want to spend with you as my patient. So we're going to go through actually an example of a one-page summary that could be very helpful for us as your providers, which I'm just calling an IBS snapshot. So a lot of people wonder, what tests are you looking for? A lot of you have had a number of different tests over the years even, and especially when you're coming to a referral center like the University of Michigan. So we're going to go through some brief tests. And along the way, feel free to take screenshots. These PowerPoints will be available to you later for your review, or just take a quick picture with your phone if you want to have that. That's perfectly fine. So first is, some lab work, basic lab work that we're going to want to see: your blood counts, liver tests, inflammatory markers, that C-reactive protein. Celiac testing is also really pertinent for especially diarrhea. Then stool studies. So if you've had fecal calprotectin, a sign of inflammation, or lactoferrin, and then a lot of times, depending upon the situation, we're going to want to check for some infections potentially as well, Giardia and C. diff that have been hopefully ruled out. Imaging. So a lot of people wonder, what exactly do you want? So Imaging the full reports are definitely helpful. We're usually looking for CT scans or MRIs of the belly in this case. If you can have those images placed on a CD and actually sent directly to us, or sometimes this can all be done electronically, if it gets pushed directly to our providers, our radiologists can actually overread it. And I'm sure many other institutions have a similar type of structure. That's very helpful. And then finally, scopes. So upper endoscopy, colonoscopy, full reports are really the most helpful, as well as their accompanying biopsy reports if you've had biopsies done. In this case, actually, images are less important for us. They're usually kind of grainy and black and white. But this is kind of giving you a collection of probably the most helpful things that we would like to see coming into that visit if we don't already have access to it through our electronic medical records. Now, we're going to go through step by step here of what I would find is a really helpful summary for a patient to come in with me so we can spend a lot more time in kind of that quality personalization aspect of the visit for your care. So first, if you really try to think about your predominant symptoms that you're experiencing. So for example, I have diarrhea, and if my abdominal pain is better after having a bowel movement, it happens on average 3 to 4 days a week. I know IBS is a very complex condition, and you have good days, good months, bad months. And so it's not necessarily going to be this is how it is all the time. But if you can kind of get a sense of what's my predominant pattern, that helps us target your treatments accordingly. Triggers. So this is, for example, garlic and onions are a very common trigger, or eating out, stress, just food in general. But if you can really find the specific types of foods, that can be helpful, but we'll talk about a more personalized way of doing that later. Prior testing. So kind of this just here just outlines for you brief summary points of and the abbreviations of those different lab tests. You can have the results attached, but if you kind of have a summary of I had this blood work, these stool tests, those types of things can really just help us quickly peruse what you've had done, what maybe the holes in the workup you've already had done that we can fill out, as well as the dates, because if it's decades old, then maybe we need to repeat some things. Previous treatments. Now, this is actually probably one of the most helpful things you can do for us because, you know, many of you have been on a number of different medications. This is a journey. And so if you're able to look back at what was I on? Because if it's something like a green pill, it's very hard for us to know what exactly you were on, and we don't want to repeat the same thing, but we also don't want to ignore potential options that we would have. So this is kind of giving you an example of a table here where I outlined the treatment I was on before, so a gluten-free diet. I was on it for 4 weeks, it just wasn't effective. That's a pretty adequate trial. This also, though, this hyoscyamin, so this is a very common medication that we use for cramping, but here this patient, only had tried 1 dose. They felt jittery and, basically it didn't work. Well, sometimes we really encourage you and coach you in terms of medications that we think might be good for you. And if we have a sense of like, well, it wasn't really giving it the good college try, if we could have that, we'll really open up more doors. As we want more open doors than we want closed. And then here's another example of like an antibiotic or something. And if you got C. diff, okay, then we're probably not going to be going for augmentin for you. C. diff is a type of infection. Finally, it's helpful going forward to have a goal. So what's your main goal with your treatment in our visit today? I want to leave home without worrying about diarrhea. Very reasonable goal, and something to help me help you to reach that goal. Some other things is like, concerns I have. Will this be my life forever? That's a very common concern and question. Treatments that you're interested in, we really want to hit those well and make sure that we've talked about them. And then also treatments that you're not specifically interested in can also be helpful points of conversation. For example, like antidepressants, we use those a ton in GI and especially in IBS. And unfortunately, there's still quite a bit of stigma surrounding mental health, and some patients, I have had some specifically say, I don't want to be started on that because I don't want depression in my chart. It could affect my insurance, my job, other types of things. And those are really helpful conversations to have up front so that we can work together to still reach your goals, but also respect the certain concerns that you have. So one actually helpful resource is the ACG's, the American College of Gastroenterology's IBS treatment checklist. So you can actually go online to that URL at the bottom there, and it'll maybe jog your memory as to previous treatments you were on. You can make those little check boxes and then print it off to bring it, and that can be another option for you. Now we're going to dive into more treatments in terms of natural supplements and pre and probiotics, and we'll start with IBS diarrhea. So soluble fiber, so one that dissolves in water, you can see some examples here, Metamucil, Benefiber. The powder actually in general works better than the capsules or gummies. You need a lot of capsules to get to the recommended dose of 30 grams a day. There's some, other effects like making you feel less hungry, things for your blood sugar that actually are beneficial here as well. If you're having some bloating, Benefiber or Citrucil may be better than something like a Metamucil. Prebiotics, actually, you could just replace some of these fiber with the name prebiotics, and some of them actually have, because in general, it's high fiber foods that are feeding the gut bacteria to maintain a healthy balance. It actually hasn't been studied as well as, soluble fiber in that setting. And so likely not better than placebo if it's in a pill form and not specifically these fiber supplements. And then probiotics. So a ton of, attention for this in the media and things like that. Unfortunately, there are a lot of various strains and preparations, so it makes the studies hard to interpret the results. It's not currently specifically recommended for IBS, but the most studied strains in IBS are Lactobacillus and Bifidobacteria. So if you see those definitely in the probiotic strain, that's a higher likelihood that you might be getting some benefit. I have here listed some brand names that if we are going to say probiotics to patients, the ones we maybe trust a little bit more. Next, we'll talk about some herbal treatments. So for IBS diarrhea, so iberogast actually has been decently studied. It's got caraway oil in it and some other things. It's actually helpful for IBS as well as functional dyspepsia, so more upper GI discomfort. Caution for you if you have liver disease or some bleeding issues, but otherwise a generally safe medication. Peppermint oil also has been actually quite well studied in some randomized trials in this, has been shown to reduce symptoms from IBS and functional dyspepsia. IV Guard is a popular brand, but there's also generics that are less expensive available. Some less studied options, but they have had some studies for them and show some promise is turmeric or curcumin, felt to possibly have anti-inflammatory effects. Possible role in constipation as well, but not as robust data as we have for the iberogast and the peppermint oil. Same thing for glutamine and berberine. So glutamine's been looked at this leaky gut, which, there's a lot of research surrounding this, although we don't have a validated tool yet necessarily to use in clinical practice to confirm increased permeability is how we refer to it. And berberine is another one that potentially has some benefit in decreasing diarrhea frequency and is relatively safe, but again, not as well studied. How about for patients with IBS constipation? So fiber here plays a key role as well. You want to aim for more water than you do with the diarrhea, where you want to kind of aim for less water because it can kind of affect you on either side of things. Aloe vera actually is another type of natural remedy that has anti-inflammatory and pain relief effects. Just be cautious as it can affect some absorption of some drugs, including blood thinners. And then pre-probiotics, those are kind of the same things as we discussed earlier. As far as IBS-C, Bifidobacterium animalis is the one that's most studied. But again, further studies in the future will hopefully limit the specific types of strains and get us better benefit, but currently not as recommended for IBS, but not necessarily problematic. It's more problematic for your pocketbook often than anything else. Okay, now we'll move to diet. So for IBS diarrhea, many of you have probably heard of a low FODMAP diet. That's probably the most well-studied diet in IBS and IBS diarrhea. It's important to stress that it's not a forever diet, okay? Because this can be a very restrictive diet that we don't want you to stay on forever because it can restrict some important nutrients. You use that restriction phase to kind of figure out, am I a responder to this diet or not? And then ideally with the guidance of a dietitian, you go through reintroduction of foods, discovering your triggers, and then personalizing your plan for you. Gluten-free diet is another common diet that I'm asked about, and this is if celiac disease has been ruled out. because we know it's definitely important for celiac disease. But as far as IBS, we actually currently don't recommend it because it actually can decrease a lot of the whole grains that are important for your overall health. However, there's more and more body of literature showing that there can be this non-celiac gluten sensitivity, that patients seem to be sensitive to things. But to complicate things even further, it's felt that potentially it's not even necessarily gluten. It may be other things within wheat causing symptoms for patients, like fructan, or some patients may be having a wheat allergy to other components in how we process wheat now that we didn't used to, decades ago. That's more the problem than actually the gluten itself. So I provide this little kind of diagram to hopefully outline as far as restrictiveness of diet going from, the most open diet, whole grains, which are important, to the most restrictive diet, which is more the low FODMAP, the restriction phase, and that there are some other options in between there, such as a wheat-free or a fructan-free diet that I encourage you to discuss with your dietitian as well as your provider as potential options for you. As far as constipation, so some natural laxatives here are more the high FODMAP foods like prunes, peaches, rhubarb. A low FODMAP diet, which is actually finding some more promise in terms of constipation treatment, is actually kiwis can be helpful for this. Now I want to dive into something that I think is really important, but maybe not as well recognized, so GI behavioral health. Okay, so this is possibly our most effective non-medication option for IBS treatment. Now, in our last few minutes to get more the medication, so what we often more talk about, but I want you to really discuss this more with your providers because I think that's a really important conversation and things that maybe you've already been on before, but we're going to summarize these here. So for IBS diarrhea, we use mechanisms like hitting the brakes of stopping things in the colon. So that's things of like loperamide or Imodium, Lamodal, that's diphenoxylate. Bile acid binders, a lot of patients I find haven't actually been on these and they potentially can be very beneficial as bile acid malabsorption can be a common cause of IBS diarrhea, and some other less common prescription medications there. Cramping calmers, so these are actually more as-needed therapies. They're anti-spasm medications, so hyoscyamin and dicyclamine. Decreased bacterial buildup. So you hear a lot about small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So this is where we'll use something like rifaximin. It has several randomized controlled trials behind that, as well as various other antibiotics that we may use. Sensitive nerve settlers. Okay, so this is where we harness the power of this gut-brain connection and use low-dose antidepressants such as tricyclics or SSRIs or SNRIs to use to calm down, and this is often more on the pain aspect of things. And then finally, command center control, using those GI behavioral health techniques to help us through the guidance of a GI behavioral health specialist. Then for our IBS-C patients, so low-cost laxatives here could be Miralax, mag citrate, milk of magnesium. Those can be very beneficial and cheap. Step on the gas. So this is some of our stimulant laxatives, so like Senna and Bisacodyl. Caution here, sometimes patients get some cramping, but again, trying to not go in it with the nocebo effect if I'm going to get cramping, but just recognize that that can be a potential side effect of these. Now we're moving into more prescription options. So linaclotide, that's Linzess. You see a lot of commercials about these help to secrete fluid within the colon to help move things along. Amitiza and some other ones. Amitiza is lubiprostone. Propulsin. So this is a newer kid on the block, the prucalopride. It's actually been around for a long time, but recently FDA approved. Tegaserot actually was previously on the market for IBS-C, but then actually taken off for cardiac reasons and things, but now actually brought back on the market. So important to talk to your doctor about if you would fit in that category of patients that can be on it safely. Now, this is something I really want to bring up is that, for some patients, it's actually not the colon itself, but more the muscles at the bottom of the pelvic floor that are not relaxing well enough. And that's called pelvic floor dysfunction, or there can be other combinations of problems that limit your ability to expel the stool. Okay, so I call these brick wall breakers. So squatty potty, which actually hasn't been evaluated in a randomized trial, but relatively cheap option to try, as well as pelvic floor physical therapy, and talk with your doctor about tests and things like that that could help, assess if this is potentially your problem. Sensitive nerve settlers, so some of the side effects of the other antidepressants can actually cause constipation, so we avoid those. But SSRIs, actually, we kind of harness some of the side effects of diarrhea of some of them to use for patients with IBS-C. And then finally, again, that GI behavioral health component. So now wrapping all of these things together to really provide you power and feel just that there's hope for you in terms of living your best IBS life. We've covered a lot of ground today. So recognizing IBS as a problem along the gut-brain microbiome axis, preparing that IBS snapshot before your visit can be a really powerful tool to make the most out of our limited time together. And the numerous effective treatments actually that we talked about. So working with your provider to kind of tip those scales to really maximize the placebo effect that you could get from it, in addition to obviously the therapeutic effect, as well as trying to decrease the nocebo that you potentially may be going into it with. Many natural supplements, herbals, diet options that are, I think, worth trying or at least exploring. GI behavioral health, like cognitive behavioral therapy and gut hypnotherapy, is actually very safe and very effective for a lot of patients. And then many prescription meds, as we just talked about, that can target a lot of variety of mechanisms. So thank you so much for listening. Again, thank you so much to the IFFGD for inviting me to talk. I'm active on Twitter, and I'm just so excited to work more with you as my patients, or just see you out in the community and have further discussions together. But thanks again so much for listening, and I hope you have a great rest of your session here.
I hope you enjoyed that talk by Dr. Justin Brandler. He gave you a couple resources during his video. One was for that IBS checklist, which I thought was fantastic.
Me too.
Sort of that snapshot of what to take to your doctor. And so we recreated that in a PDF form. It's available on our website for download for you. I believe the link was included in the chat box. If you aren't able to get to chat, you can find it on our website on the Norton Educational Series page at IFFGD at if.org. Sorry, that was my email. IFFGD.org. And we can get you that PDF of the IBS snapshot. The other resource that he mentioned was that the American College of Gastroenterology created a treatment checklist. And those are things that you can go through and just click off. It ends up printing out for you an actual document you can carry to your doctor to help them to understand what different treatments you've tried. This is included in that snapshot. So you can just do the snapshot, or if you want to go to that link and go through the ACG little tool, that's very helpful for patients as well. In the chat, we got a question. And the question was asking about nocebo, and what does that mean? Dr. Brandler mentioned that in his talk. So, Dr. Esron, tell us a little bit about what a nocebo is.
Yeah, most people understand or have heard of a placebo effect. So, placebo effect is when you go into a situation with a preconceived notion that something is going to make you feel better. And just because you have that conditioning or that preconceived notion, you actually end up feeling better, whether it's from the medication or treatment or just because of that expectation. The nocebo effect is essentially the opposite of that. So if I go into a situation thinking that I'm going to get a side effect from a medication, I'm going to be more likely to get that side effect. Or if I go into a situation where I'm fearful that a particular food is going to make me feel badly, there's a much higher chance that I will actually feel worse from that food. And so it's kind of the flip side. And so the placebo effect and the nocebo effect really influence how a patient is feeling, with and without being exposed to a certain kind of treatment, medication, or food.
Interesting. That is actually new terminology that's just come around in the last couple of years, but it makes so much sense.
Yeah.
So we're going to build a little bit more on that lower GI section, and next we have Kimberly Harrer, and Dr. Harrer is a professor here, assistant professor.
One of my colleagues here at Michigan Medicine, and she's going to talk to you about constipation, symptoms, evaluation, causes, and treatment.
Fantastic, and she is a great speaker, so please enjoy her talk on constipation.
It's a tremendous privilege to have the opportunity as a gynecologist to have patients place their trust in me to discuss and treat these sensitive GI issues. Although I'm not physically present with you today, it is my honor and privilege to be able to discuss this topic with you. In today's presentation, we'll discuss the prevalence of constipation. Spoiler alert, it's likely more common than you think. Review the causes, symptoms, evaluate treatment of constipation, and finally discuss some constipation tips and tricks. So how common is constipation? There's often a misconception that constipation only occurs in the elderly. However, approximately 16% of the general population have, with up to 30% of children and up to 50% older adults suffering with constipation. This is an incredible condition and affects patients of all ages. Although some people experience lifelong constipation, many people tend to have intermittent constipation. This often occurs with changes in routine, such as traveling or diet changes, or with hormone fluctuations. So what causes constipation? Typically, constipation is divided into 3 general categories. The first category is normal transit constipation, in which the stool moves through the colon normally, but the stool lacks water and is typically hard. The second category is slow transit constipation, in which the stool is slow to move through the colon. This is often due to a colon that does not squeeze adequately. This is sometimes, always, associated with disorders that affect connective tissue, muscle function, or nerve function. This would include diagnoses such as diabetes, multiple sclerosis, and Parkinson's disease. The third category is evacuation disorders. Many people believe having a bowel movement is simple and easy. However, numerous muscles must contract or relax in a well-coordinated fashion in order to have a bowel movement. If one of the muscles is not working as part of the team, this can impair a person's ability to pass stool. For example, one common cause of an evacuation disorder is when the anal sphincter, the muscle that should relax and open to allow stool to exit the body, does not open. In some cases, this muscle may even paradoxically contract. Thus, the person is attempting to push stool out against a wall instead of an open door. There are also structural abnormalities such as rectal prolapse or a rectocele that can impair stool passage out of the body and result in constipation. Rectal prolapse is when the rectal tissue outside of the body. A rectocele is when the tissue wall that keeps the rectum in place weakens, and the rectum can bulge forward into the vagina or bladder, or sometimes backwards. This bulging creates a pocket for the stool to push into instead of being pushed out through the anal opening. Pelvic floor issues are often associated with pelvic surgeries or vaginal deliveries, particularly with large babies or large tears. It is also important to understand that evacuation disorders can occur simultaneously with either of the first 2 categories. Keep these 3 categories in mind, as we will come back to them when we discuss constipation treatment later in this presentation. You may have noticed I didn't mention diagnoses on the prior slide. When discussing constipation diagnoses, things get a bit muddy. One of the most frequently asked questions that I get related to constipation diagnosis is this IBS with constipation or another type of constipation? This is often a bit challenging, but one key thing to note is that IBS is a diagnosis that always has abdominal pain as an associated symptom. For today's talk, we're going to talk generally about constipation and leave the discussion of IBS with constipation versus other types of constipation for another talk. what are symptoms of constipation? Symptoms differ from patient to patient. The most common symptoms people often associate with constipation are hard or infrequent stools. But what are infrequent stools? What are hard stools? I have patients who have a bowel movement some once a week, and others who only have a bowel movement once per month. Traditionally, it was recommended to have at least one bowel movement every 1 to 2 days that is soft and easy to pass. However, constipation can certainly still be present if someone's having daily bowel movements, if they are not having complete bowel movements. In a similar vein, people who only have a bowel movement every 3 to 4 days don't necessarily have constipation if they're having complete evacuation of stool without straining during bowel movements. Thus, constipation is a bit more complex, and the diagnosis is often made after taking a thorough history, including the presence or absence of other symptoms listed on the table. In particular, patients will often tell me, I have a bowel movement at least once a day, but I don't feel like I'm getting it all out. I feel like I need to pass more stool. This feeling of inadequate stool passage is called a sense of incomplete evacuation. This symptom gives me a strong indicator that constipation may be present. Another symptom of constipation is diarrhea. Yes, diarrhea. Actually cause something called overflow diarrhea. Think of it as a river flowing over rocks. The liquid stool is able to flow over the hard, bulky stool and exit, but the stool rocks remain in the colon. Patients with overflow diarrhea may describe passing both hard and liquid or mushy stool in the same day or even within the same bowel movement. Fecal incontinence can also occur as a constipation, particularly if there's a large amount of stool in the rectum. Unfortunately, the anal sphincter, that muscle right at the end of the colon, typically good at keeping solid stool from passing involuntarily. However, liquid stool is more challenging to keep inside and can leak out around the bulky rectal stool. Talking about bowel movements is challenging and understandably a bit uncomfortable. Thus, the Bristol stool chart was developed to aid in this discussion. Stool types range from type 1, which is hard, pellet-like stools, to type 7, which is pure liquid stool. A normal bowel form is typically type 3 or 4. Types 1 to 2 indicate constipation. However, as discussed a few moments ago, constipation can be present with a wide range of stool consistencies, particularly if there's a sense of incomplete evacuation or overflow diarrhea present. How do we evaluate constipation? One of the first things we look for are concerning for a more serious underlying cause of constipation, such as cancer. These symptoms are known as red flag symptoms and include weight loss or rectal bleeding. If any red flag symptoms are present, colonoscopy is recommended. A colonoscopy is when a flexible tube with a camera and light on the end is used to look at the colon. A physical exam is performed, often including a exam to evaluate for pelvic floor dyssynergia, the disorder I mentioned earlier when the pelvic floor muscles do not work together in a well-coordinated fashion. The provider also look for anything obstructing the anal canal, such as a tumor or polyp. Depending on the patient, a provider may perform additional testing to rule out anemia, which may indicate blood loss from the GI tract, or they may rule out a thyroid issue, cause the colon to slow down. To evaluate for those evacuation disorders, anorectal manometry can be performed. This uses a small, flexible tube about the size of a pen with small sensors attached to it to evaluate the strength and coordination of the anorectal muscles. Defecography is a study contrast placed inside the rectum and x-rays to evaluate for structural problems such as the previously discussed rectocele or prolapse. There are some tests to evaluate colon transit and slow transit constipation. However, these are less frequently used as time intensive and are often only ordered if they'll lead to a change in management. Evaluation also includes reviewing any medications, and the list of constipating medications is quite long. I have listed a few of the most common ones on the slide, but some of the most common medications for constipation are blood pressure medications. Something I also see fairly commonly is the use of hyoscyamine or dicyclomine to treat abdominal pain due to intestinal spasm or diarrhea. This is often very appropriate. However, if the pain is due to constipation and the associated spasm from that, use of these medications to treat the spasm works in the short term, but it makes the underlying constipation worse. This can increase constipation and abdominal pain symptoms in the long run. The same issue occurs when these medications or Imodium are used to treat diarrhea, but the diarrhea is actually due to that overflow diarrhea we were talking about. There can be short-term benefit, but the underlying cause of constipation remains untreated. A vicious cycle of constipation and diarrhea and constipation can occur. This highlights why it is important to understand if constipation is contributing to individual symptoms. If there are no red flag symptoms and other causes of constipation, such as thyroid dysfunction, have been excluded, we need to move on to treatment. When we think about treatment, I like to think of 3 subcategories we described earlier. I try to determine what the primary driver of constipation may be. For example, is it a lack of water or fiber in the diet? Is it a patient with multiple sclerosis and have slow transit? Or is it a patient who has to strain to pass even or mushy stool, and I'm concerned there's pelvic floor dyssynergia? We will discuss treatments more in depth in the next few slides, but understanding the potential cause of constipation may help identify more effective therapies. For example, if a patient with slow transit constipation comes in, they may respond better to exercise or a medication that improves colon squeezing, instead of using fiber supplementation, which can result in more bulky stool that the slow colon has difficulty pushing through. Similarly, if there's a high suspicion for pelvic floor dyssynergia, pelvic floor physical therapy may be pursued sooner. Admittedly, it's not always possible to determine which subgroup of constipation a person has, and constipation severity occurs on a very broad spectrum. Some people have constipation a few days a year when traveling. Some people have constipation for a few months during times of stress. And some people have constipation their entire life. Treatment recommendations are often escalated based on severity and frequency of the constipation symptoms. The first step is in lifestyle modifications. These include increasing water intake, fiber intake, and activity. Adding prunes or kiwi into the diet can also help. I often get asked about probiotics, and some patients report benefit. There's little evidence supporting use to treat constipation at this time. There's some ongoing studies to determine if specific diets, such as the low FODMAP diet, are effective at treating constipation. If diet and lifestyle modifications are not effective or incompletely effective, there are many over-the-counter treatments available. Frequently used options include fiber supplements and stool thinners. It should be noted that increasing fiber may cause increased symptoms in patients with slow transit constipation or evacuation disorders due to the colon having to handle more voluminous and bulkier stool that it has a hard time moving through the colon and out of the body. Fiber can also cause bloating and should be increased slowly after initiation. Medications such as Miralax or magnesium help keep inside the colon, and stimulants such as senna or bisphosphonol promote the colon to squeeze and push stool through the colon. Although Miralax and magnesium are safe, to use daily use of stimulant laxatives is typically not recommended. Enemas or suppositories can also help promote stool evacuation, and in particular help expel any hard rectal stool. Stimulating the anal area when using an enema or suppository also promotes the colon to start squeezing. If diet, lifestyle, and over-the-counter are not effective, prescription medications are typically the next step. These medications often act by increasing water secretion into the intestines or by increasing colon squeezing. These treatments are more often used in patients with more persistent daily constipation. These treatments can also be used with many over-the-counter treatments. Another important therapy is for patients in that third group, evacuation disorders. For pelvic floor dyssynergia, where the muscles don't work in a well-coordinated fashion, pelvic floor physical therapy with biofeedback therapy is recommended. This is a specific type of physical therapy that helps retrain the muscles to work together in a well-coordinated fashion again. Acupuncture has been used for constipation. There is some good data supporting its therapy or its use for constipation treatment. A unique treatment currently being tested is a vibrating capsule that is swallowed and uses vibration to help promote stool movement and passage. This isn't ready for prime time yet, but something to keep in mind to come. It's an entire team of experts from many different specialties that work together to treat patients with constipation and evacuation disorders. From dietary, physical therapies to surgical treatment of anorectal structural disorders, a comprehensive approach to constipation management is recommended. This is particularly important for patients who have severe, persistent symptoms. If constipation is not treated, it can lead to complications, hemorrhoids, anal fissures, diverticulosis, or even pelvic floor dyssynergia. Final tips for constipation management. Be proactive at preventing constipation before, particularly if constipation tends to occur during specific times, such as traveling, during the winter, or during menstruation. Allow yourself enough time to have a bowel movement. It is normal to have the urge to have a bowel movement after meals. This is called the gastric reflex and is a signal sent from the stomach to the colon during meals. Our bodies are smart, and they say if there is cargo coming into the stomach, cargo needs to be sent out of the colon. Try to not signal to have bowel movement. Try to avoid daily use of stimulant laxatives. Seek medical care if new constipation, chronic constipation worsens, or red flag symptoms develop. Diet, activity, and hormones often change. And so, regimen. It is okay to adjust the regimen based on what your body needs at different times. I've included a few questions that you want to ask your doctor if you're suffering with constipation. What is the most likely cause of my symptoms? Are there tests I need to evaluate the cause of constipation? And how do I need to prepare for them? What treatments do you recommend? If the initial treatment doesn't work, what will you recommend next? Do you have a dietitian available like you? Are any of my medications potentially causing constipation? Thank you for your time and attention and for the opportunity to speak with you today about this important.
Hi, thank you. Welcome back. That was actually our last physician talk of the day here at the University of Michigan, where we're hosting the Norton Educational Series, an educational program of the International Foundation for Gastrointestinal Disorders, or IFFGD. Dr. Ezron, we had a question during this talk about constipation, about someone who's taking pain medication and has found themselves being constipated. And I know that this is actually a whole lot more common than people think. Is this someone, this happens to them, should they be talking to their gastroenterologist, or talking about their constipation if they're on pain meds? Is there a link?
So not all pain medications are associated with constipation, but opioids are definitely associated with a diffuse slowing of the GI tract in general. Specifically with constipation, opioids, the effect of constipation related to opioids is pretty immediate, and so it happens pretty quickly after starting the medication and doesn't necessarily improve with time either. It works like two ways. Opioids decrease or slow down the transit time of the gut, and it also decreases rectal sensitivity and helps and makes pelvic floor dyssynergia worse, something that Dr. Harrer talked about. And so it is important to share the fact that you're on any pain medication, but specifically opiates for if you're having GI issues. Generally, we treat opioid-induced constipation pretty similarly to how we would treat other kinds of constipation, but there are specific medications for OIC, or opioid-induced constipation, and those are essentially opioid analogs that block the effects of the opiate in the GI tract, but don't cause any effect on like the pain-relieving effect of the medicine. And that kind of constipation treatment can only be used in OIC.
Oh, well, that's fantastic. That is great to know. So I kind of hate to wrap up this the day. So I'm really excited that we have one more talk.
Yeah, I know. We
And I think you guys are gonna really enjoy hearing from Erin Slater. Erin has been a friend of IFFGD for many, many years, probably 15, 20 years, for almost as long as her story is. She came to IFFGD looking for a community when she was really at her worst. And we've seen her through her entire journey, and I'm not going to give any spoilers, but she is a registered dietitian now, and so that really makes her story very relevant to all of we're talking about today, and sort of the diet and gut health and nutrition. So please enjoy Erin's story. We also have a copy of her full story that she has written in your program guide, and of course the program guide, which this is what it looks like, is available for download at iffgd.org, and inside we will have there's pictures and her story, and so please enjoy listening to Erin, and then we'll be back in a few minutes to wrap up.
Hi, my name is Erin. And first, I want to thank the IFFGD and Cecile for inviting me to speak today. This is my patient story. All right, so before I begin, I want to say to any of the patients listening or watching today that my story is not meant to be a roadmap to a cure. And actually, I've been somewhat hesitant to share my story lately. I've met a lot of people, I've spoken to a lot of people who over the last 10 years have been dramatically affected by their functional GI disorder. Some of whose symptoms have improved, some who have lived every day not knowing how they're going to cope, and some people who have found success through the change in their diet, change in medication or other therapy. I think the one thing that we share together is frustration. Frustration with the medical system, with medical professionals, frustration with those who have found an answer that doesn't seem to work for all of us. And what I've learned is, and I hope that you'll see through my story, is that you should never give up, never stop trying, and keep an open mind. The Rome Foundation created a list of functional GI disorders, and I've learned that each person's symptoms and the perception of their symptoms is unique. So nevertheless, this is my story. My name is Erin, and I think I was born with a stomach ache. My mom will happily tell strangers, if you come to our house, that I was constipated since the age of 2. And that she would chase me around the living room trying to administer medication. Sit there long enough and she'll tell you about how I made her late, for work at least twice a week when I was in elementary school because I was stuck in the bathroom, constipated. And I often had a stomach ache at school, and I would miss math class, maybe sometimes on purpose, because I was in the bathroom and my bowels were spasming. But to be honest with you, I never thought of it as a chronic problem. It was just me. Then one day in July of 2004, my mom and I had just spent a day at the beach, and we had come home, and I had a horrible stomach ache, horrible. I was 17 years old. My dad had died the year before. I had just started my first job, and I was deep in the stress of applying to college. I had visited my primary care doctor, who said, "It's just stress." But she didn't give me any help. She didn't give me any way to cope with the stress, any tools to use, anyone to talk to. Just, it's stress. So, all right. I spent that first evening watching MTV. I'm 17 years old. And I was wishing my horrible stomach ache would go away. And in the morning, it was gone. But every day it came back, again and again. It was an indescribable pain, like a burning, a sour, twisting pain. School started that September, and I found that I was eating less and less. I was eating less and less to try to control the pain. I cut out dairy. I cut out fibrous foods. I cut out sweets. I cut out fried foods. And I was down to egg whites and rice cakes. When I visited my first GI doctor, I was a little under 18 years old, and I had already lost 15 pounds. GERD, he said, and he gave me some pills, and so I asked, but what should I eat? And he shrugged and said, anything you want. The pills seemed to work for a while, and I tried to eat more, but that only lasted a short time. I was becoming more nauseous, more depressed. I went to my second GI doctor, and he said he did some tests, upper GI, a barium swallow, a CT. Everything was normal. He gave me some pills that was supposed to stop the spasming, and he told me I was probably lactose intolerant. Although I had no diarrhea, I had no gas or bloating, and I hadn't touched dairy products in more than 6 months. And he told me that I also probably had IBS, but didn't really give me any further explanation. So I asked him, but what do I eat? So he said with a smile, anything you want. I lost another 5 pounds, and now I was 114 pounds before I left for college that fall. I went to school with a prescription for hyoscyamine and hoped that one day this nightmare would end. But every day I woke up in pain. I walked through campus in pain, and I sat through class hoping that the pain would go away. I had chosen pharmacy school. I wanted to become a pharmacist and figure out what kind of medication I needed to make this pain go away. That was my goal. However, every day I could feel myself getting weaker. I was surviving on about 20 foods at that point, doing my best to figure out what was causing these symptoms. This twisting, burning pain that was radiating from my belly button in all directions. In the beginning of my sophomore year, I decided that becoming a pharmacist wasn't the answer. I would never survive the 6 years that it would take to find the magic pill. That battle against food was daily, so I changed my major, I changed universities, I changed states, and I ended up going to Penn State University to major in nutritional science and become a dietitian. So for the non-dietitians listening out there, you have to get right now your bachelor's in science or bachelor's in nutrition, and then spend a year going into an internship. You have to get matched, just like a doctor, to get into an internship, and then you have to take an exam, a national exam, to become a registered dietitian. So keep that in mind. All right. I studied all the textbooks. Was it fiber? Was it sugar? Was it a defect in my anatomy and physiology? I visited my third GI doctor between my sophomore and junior year of college. She did a colonoscopy. Everything was normal. I asked her, but what do I eat? And she shrugged. Avoid broccoli. Oh, great, thanks. I was 110 pounds. By my senior year of college, studying nutrition, I had to strategize how I was going to make it to class and what I would eat. I was now down to 5 or 6 foods. And after I ate, I couldn't leave my room for at least 2 hours because the pain was excruciating. I was malnourished and I was suicidal. Depression had taken over. I thought about dying every day, and I know this isn't a particularly welcome subject, but I bring it up because I want any practitioners listening out there to understand that the disorder might be invisible, but the pain is real. And that whether you believe depression and anxiety caused my GI symptoms or whether my GI symptoms caused my depression and anxiety, to me, it never mattered. Because I was 21 years old and barely functioning. I graduated with my bachelor's in nutritional science in May of 2009, and that's when things fell apart. I didn't get into my dietetic internship. Remember, you need that to be a dietitian. And I no longer had school to focus on. I found myself in bed daily in pain, taking old hydrocodone pills that were left over from getting my wisdom teeth out several years ago. And as you can see from my slide, I have no pictures of my graduation. Because who needs pictures when you don't think you're going to survive much longer? Now I was 100 pounds. That was it. My fourth GI doctor. My last GI doctor. My mom and I traveled 7 hours from the suburbs of Philadelphia to Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and this time it was different. This doctor actually listened to my symptoms. I didn't have GERD. I did have IBS with constipation, as we can tell from when I was 2 years old, but that wasn't causing the excruciating pain. I actually had functional abdominal pain syndrome and IBS-C, and years of pain and years of doctors not recognizing the problem had made it worse. He started me on medication, and then a month later on a second medication, and the pain was quickly reduced. I could sleep again. I could eat again. But the damage had been done, and I was scared to eat anything new. I was scared to walk into restaurants. I also had a 4-month course of cognitive behavioral therapy to get through my fear of eating again, and I had visited an excellent psychologist. And a year after I visited my fourth GI doctor, I was sitting in the cafeteria eating with my preceptors in my dietetic internship. Look how skinny I was. And I was volunteering with the IFFGD. I was standing outside the Today Show looking like a crazy lady with a big poster and a flower hat. That's me. And today, 10 years later, I work in a community hospital in Florida, and I see patients who are struggling just like I did. Maybe not with the exact symptoms, but with the same anxiety and doubt that things will ever get better. And that's what I want to share with you. That's what I want my story to be about. So often, patients and practitioners feel like they're locked in a battle against each other. And as we talk here today, I hope that through our Norton Education series, just like Bill and Nancy did 30 years ago, we strive to learn more about the patient perspective. Thank you.
Thank you again for joining us here for the inaugural Norton Educational Series event, streamed live from the University of Michigan. Again, thank you for being with us today, for partaking, for engaging, asking some really, really, really great questions. And thank you for putting up with our technical issues this morning and hanging in there with us and helping us to really make this a very productive day. I know on behalf of IFFGD, we just want to say thank you, not only for those of you in the audience, but also for the patients that helped us to put this together. IFFGD likes to lean on patients for contributions, for their ideas and their thoughts, and especially to Aaron Slater, who not only spoke for today's event, but also was on the planning committee with us as well, and for sharing with us and for sharing with you guys today. We also want to thank 2 companies that were generously willing to donate funds to be able to cover the cost of this program. And that's Ironwood Pharmaceuticals and AbbVie Pharmaceuticals. And we really genuinely want to thank them for their support to make this programming possible for you today. And of course, thank you to the University of Michigan, Shanti especially, all of your hard work to get us here, but also your colleagues. There's so many, and there's so many that took part in this.
It was really our privilege and our pleasure to be able to partner with you at IFFGD for this. I'd like to thank the Food for Life Kitchen, Erica Owing, Dr. Bill Che, who kind of helped pioneer this and help with the logistics of today. The physician speakers, who I thought were all really amazing, our event support staff. But you know, I felt like all of the talks were really good today, but the one that resonated with me the most was Erin's story. It was really powerful, and she told it in such a gracious and grateful way, and it really reminds us why we do what we do.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And I know it's always great to hear patient stories, and we hope that as we continue this program, we'll be able to do more of those. And always glad to give back to the physicians who are giving so much to us. And so thank you for all that you do for patients and for IFFGD. And we hope that everyone has enjoyed this programming. If you have questions, if you think of something later or comments that you would have for us, please let us know. You can email us at iffgd@iffgd.org. We will have the entire program available on our website tomorrow, and that will include downloads of the PowerPoints that you've seen throughout the day, as well as the actual video recordings that you can watch. So please check out our website tomorrow, or email us, or check us out on social media, because we'll be giving you all those great links to those resources starting tomorrow on our website. So again, thank you very much, and thank you to Michigan, this great kitchen. I hate that we weren't able to cook here, but at least we were able to broadcast from this fantastic facility. So thank you very much, and have a wonderful day.